Today I'm speaking with Sherrie D'Souza. Sherrie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
And Sherrie is coming all the way from Sydney, Australia. So we had to coordinate our schedules here. So I appreciate your work with me on that. And just a very brief bio for Sherrie, and then I'll let Sherrie fill you in on more of what she's doing. Sherrie went to the University of New England, and she is in Sydney, Australia. She's married to her husband, Sacha. Is that correct?
Sasha, yes.
Sasha, okay. And she's also, this is where it's really cool. She's a board member at Recovering from Religion, which is it's a worldwide organization now, right?
Yes, yes.
And but you actually were one of the core pillars there for Sydney. You started the first support group for recovering from religion in Sydney, Australia,
Yes.
which is amazing. I want to hear more about that when we get to that point. And then also in terms of your professional work, you're a healthcare administrator. And for the purposes of this interview, you're also a former Jehovah's Witness. So lots of stuff to unpack there. But before we get into the details, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, here in Sydney, I'm 46 years of age and would never have imagined that my life course would lead me to where I am today, because I'm a totally different person to what I thought I would have been. And that's because when you're raised as a Jehovah's Witness, life is very strict. It's very laid out for you what it is that you should do. And so as a child, I always saw myself first and foremost as a Jehovah's Witness, and that would be my life course, that I would just always be a Jehovah's Witness. So to now be where I am now is just like, I still pinch myself at the journey of how I've gotten from A to Z, it nearly feels like, and yet there's so much more yet to do.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing some of the details.
Yeah.
In terms of your just what you do with your life besides the professional stuff, do you have any hobbies or pastimes that you like to try to squeeze in?
Squeeze in, yes, that is the word. I have two adorable Abyssinian cats that I love to bits. Their names are Abernathy and Sydney, and they have their own Instagram page, and I love them. They certainly make the day brighter.
Nice.
And I love catching up with friends. Of course, COVID has made that somewhat more challenging, so I'm looking forward to when we can really meet together again. That'd be fantastic. And I like doing cross stitch. So when I get some time to do that, that's in my happy place. I'm in a very peaceful, let's just look at colors and match
That's
it,
awesome.
and the brain can switch off for a bit.
That takes some patience too, to especially if you're doing a really big piece. Couple.
I've got this piece I'm doing now that I call my retirement piece, because I think it's going to take me all the way through to about 60, 70 to finish it. It's absolutely huge.
Nice. Family heirloom. Well,
Yeah.
in terms of, before we get started to the part of your story, I always like to throw in some kind of icebreaker. And I'd love to hear, since you're in Australia, if people were visiting, your area and they were like wanting to see the most amazing thing there, what would you take them to?
Oh, that's a really hard question to answer, Tim, because there's just so much around us. We live in southwest Sydney, and we're in close proximity to just some wonderful things in New South Wales. So you can head into Sydney. A day on the harbour is the best, to just see the Sydney Opera House and the Harbour Bridge is magnificent. There's so much to see within Sydney. But then if you go west of us, there's the Blue Mountains, and there's some beautiful things up there to see. About 20 minutes south is the Southern Highlands, and there's waterfalls, and the southernmost tip of rainforest is there. Just some beautiful countryside. And then there's the South Coast, which is just so green and lush and beautiful. And there's a little fishing village that my aunt lives in Greenwell Point on the South Coast, that is just the most relaxing, beautiful place to spend some time. So we're really spoilt for choice here.
That's awesome.
As to what you can see. There's lots to see.
Yeah, I've only been in Sydney once in my life. When I was just out of college, I went on a missions trip to New Guinea. So we were in LA to Sydney for a half a day, or just about a day, and then up to Port Moresby, New Guinea, and into the jungle. for a missions trip. But
Wow.
yeah, have you ever been up to New Guinea?
No.
It's pretty amazing. We actually, there's like the big, New Guinea, but then there's also like the little islands off of it. And the one we
Yes.
went to at the very end was I think it's called New Britain,
Right.
and that was really remote. You're like flying in on a grass airstrip, and then you're, going through the jungle by foot, and it's pretty intense.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is intense. It's you can't just duck down to the corner shop for some milk and bread.
No, and it was the one time I'll say I was really. I can't say there's many times in my life when I've been really like freaked out by something, but we were in the middle of the jungle and sleeping with a mosquito net under this table, and at night, a whole big group of us, and I woke up to something hurting my elbow, and I quickly flashed my flashlight on, and it was a rat the size of a small cat
Oh
gnawing
my
at my elbow, and
goodness.
it freaked me out. I was very glad for my vaccinations and all that, but
Oh
it
boy.
worked out
Yeah.
okay. It was merely a flesh wound. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I wanted to get to your story. You mentioned Jehovah's Witnesses. So were your parents Jehovah's Witnesses then, I assume? Okay.
Yes,
So
that's right. So my father, his parents were witnesses. My mother, though, she converted in her late teens, early 20s, and was the only member of her family to become a Jehovah's Witness.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so from the earliest days, for your experience, was Jehovah's Witnesses were the true religion. Can I
Yes.
ask, before you tell us more about that, did you ever get a comparison as you were growing up between Jehovah's Witnesses and other Christians? Like, were you considered the real Christians,
Oh,
or like were other Christians allowed to kind of still be considered Christians in any sense?
no.
Okay.
In fact, there's this. Now I realize that Jehovah's Witnesses are not the only ones that have this view, but they use the term the truth to say that that's what they are. They have the truth, the one and only truth. You, as a Jehovah's Witnesses, you don't like to refer to yourself as a Christian or as a religion, because that lumps you in the basket of everybody else.
Yep.
So you're trying to distinguish yourself and show that you're the real, true Christianity. So yes, that's certainly the way that Jehovah's Witnesses view themselves. And so growing up as a child, that was very firmly in my mind, that it makes you grow up feeling that you're special, that you're different, unique, and not the same as everybody else.
So what kind of teachings did you get from the earliest days? What were the main things that they would teach children about the Lord? And do they call him the Lord or just Jehovah?
No, I know. And as soon as you said that, I thought, there's something I have to just point out here from the get-go. While Jehovah's Witnesses are Christians, they do believe in Jesus Christ and they model their lives after him. They do not believe in the Trinity. And this is a major difference between Jehovah's Witnesses and other Christian denominations. They believe that Jesus Christ was the firstborn of all creation. And that yes, he came down to earth, and yes, he gave his life as a sacrifice for mankind. But they believe that the Creator, the Father, Jehovah, he is the one that deserves the worship and the glory, and he is the one that you strive to have a relationship with through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So Jesus plays a very big role, but Jehovah plays a major role. He is the much bigger character within the theology. And so as a child, that language it's ingrained in you right from the very beginning. In fact, as a child, it's one of the first words that you're taught is Jehovah. And in the meetings, because they have, well, in my youth, it was 5 meetings a week. And some of those meetings require audience participation. And so a little child will give their very first answer, put their hand up, have the microphone put in front of them, and come out with, as clear as they can, Jehovah. So it's just there right from the start. And then when you go to school, all of the other teachings start to coalesce and become very real for you in school, because there's a lot of things that you cannot participate in. Jehovah's Witnesses do not celebrate Christmas. They don't celebrate birthdays. In fact, any public holiday or any celebration is a no.
I can understand the Christmas one because of it having so much with paganism, and that honestly
yes.
surprises me in some ways. But what's the rule against birthdays?
Okay, so for birthdays, Jehovah's Witnesses are Bible literalists. So they take the Bible as their manual for life. So if the Bible doesn't refer to something, then their conclusion is it's a no-go. When you look at the Bible and birthdays, only 2 birthdays are referred to. And that is Pharaoh's birthday, where his, I can't remember if it was the wine bearer or the cupbearer or the baker, one of them got beheaded. And the other was Herod's birthday, where John the Baptist was killed and beheaded. So therefore, conclusion is 2 birthdays in the Bible, both of them not worshippers of Jehovah. In both instances, murders occur. Conclusion is birthday's evil. There is another linchpin to that too, and that is that if Adam and Eve had not sinned in the Garden of Eden, then they reason out that Adam and Eve would still be alive now, and we would all be in a paradise earth if they had not sinned right at the beginning. If you are living forever, what use is a birthday? What's the point of marking down each year? It doesn't have any significance if you are living forever. And they still believe that Jehovah has not, that's still his purpose, that though there was this rebellion in the Garden of Eden, he still wants the earth to return to that purpose. And so they believe in Armageddon being a literal war, and that only Jehovah's Witnesses will survive, and that after that Armageddon has happened and the earth has been cleansed of wickedness, that Jesus Christ will rule over the earth in God's kingdom. They believe that the kingdom is actually a government. It is a ruling body, and that it will return the earth to the original purpose that God intended. So the earth will return to a paradise, and it will only have true worshippers of Jehovah living on earth. So you grow up thinking you're going to live forever. You're never going to grow old. In fact, quite often, the language that you hear at meetings, what you read in the literature, just the social, cultural element of the organization, you're expected that Armageddon's going to come before you even finish school. You're not going to get to an age where you have to think about the things that older people have to think about, superannuation and pensions and healthcare and all that. You're not going to have to worry about that, because Armageddon's going to come first.
So did the older people in the church seem surprised that they reached that age?
Some probably do. I can tell you that when I turned 30, I had like a crisis. I never thought I was going to turn 30 and still be in this world, and that Armageddon wouldn't have come yet. And that really rocked me, because the language of the 80s from the organization was just so intense. So Armageddon's right around the corner. It's not far away. You know, we don't have much longer to wait. So I can only imagine that for older generation Jehovah's Witnesses, there has been that, why are we still waiting? It still hasn't come. But even then, the organization's quite crafty in how it manages that situation, because it glorifies or praises the older ones for continuing to have faith. And that even if their life course on earth ends before Armageddon comes, they were so faithful that they will be rewarded by being resurrected back onto that paradise earth when it comes around. So it's painted in terms that even if you've decades as a witness and the end still hasn't come, you know, the problem is you haven't had enough faith. God's the great timekeeper. He knows what he's doing. You have to trust in him, leave it to him, and you've just got to keep enduring.
Well, no, taking it. That's a lot of theology there and doctrine,
Yes,
and I do want to dive
sorry.
into some of that some more. But in terms of just the simplicity of your earliest days in your story, um, I'm assuming that they have like a Sunday school kind of thing for kids, where you learn a lot of songs. Did you do songs like that at church, and did you do songs at home? Like, was there some kind of what we might have called a devotional time or a Bible time or some kind of home worship that you did too?
So, Jehovah's Witnesses do not have Sunday school.
Okay.
They do not have any meetings or sessions where children are separated from parents. The organization is adamant that children are the responsibility of the parents. So it is up to the parents to conduct studies with their children to help them, now, to indoctrinate them into the religion, really.
Right.
And it's very much then the domain of the head of the household, of the father, to what Ephesians 6:4 comes to mind. Can I just say, this is incredibly triggering. I'm amazed that after several years, it's still just coming back to me so easily. So just acknowledging that.
No, I totally understand it.
Oh,
it does for me too.
Yeah. So Ephesians 6:4 about bringing children up in the mental regulating of Jehovah. And the organization very much teaches that's father's responsibility to do that. In our household, my father struggled to do that consistently. I do remember as a child I didn't understand everything he was saying. It was like he was offloading information that a teenager might understand, but me at 6 or 7 had no idea what he was talking about.
Like trying to explain theology to you?
Yes, okay. Yes, like deeper things that I just didn't get.
Did they do like simple stuff, like just memorize a few verses here or there?
Yes, yeah, definitely you have that. There is a Bible stories book which tells the Bible in horrific detail. And as a child, you're very much the pictures leave a deep impression on you. I remember going through that book, the flood story, and the way that had been pictured in the book was quite impressionable.
Like the graphics themselves?
The graphics themselves. The story of Korah, really, the whole idea of the ground opening up to swallow this rebellious group, that to me was just absolutely horrific. One of the books that the Jehovah's Witnesses have, this is from the 70s, I think it's from the 70s, Listening to the Great Teacher, was a little pink book, and it had a illustration of that event. And you see this sort of ground, the chasm of the ground, and it's like you're looking at both cliffs and people are falling into it. And like the looks on the faces of these people, I was just horrified by it. So you grow up knowing that Armageddon's going to come. So you have this fear of a vindictive God that if you don't please him, you're at risk of being destroyed. And you have all of these examples in this lovely Bible book that you're being taught by your parents of all of these people who have been destroyed because they've not pleased the God. Yeah. So it's very fearful as a child.
So what if there's so much of a fear and wrath kind of background to it and a context to it, what is the main message to you as to how to be on the, oversimplified, on the good side, but on God's side, to have peace with God? Did they frame it in the sense of like a personal salvation? Like how does that match? As like if we would have said as we were Christians, something like this: if you were to die tonight, how do you know you're going to go to heaven? Or if you were to die tonight and God were to say, why should I let you in? Why shouldn't I put you in hell? What would your answer be? And of course, the answer for us would have had to have been, not by my own works of righteousness. I don't claim any good works in myself, but I believed in Christ as my substitute. Was it like that, or was it a different nuance?
No, it is actually quite similar to what you've just described. The difference, I suppose, is that it's your personal relationship with Jehovah. So you are working hard to appeal to him. So even as a child, you are taught how to pray and you're taught to develop that relationship with Jehovah. A little funny story: when I was 7, I was the only Jehovah's Witness child in this school in Sydney. And that in itself was a whole other dynamic. But this particular day was just before Christmas, and the school was going to have Santa Claus come to meet all of the children. And I freaked out because there was no warning about this. There was no, this is going to happen on this day. No. So this is 1983, no, 82. And Santa Claus is going to come, and I'm freaking out. I'm sitting in the classroom praying. Like, oh, I don't want to meet Santa Claus. I don't want to meet Santa Claus. I can't meet Santa Claus. Santa Claus is bad. Christmas is bad. Please, Jehovah, get me out of this. And in Jesus Christ, amen. And then again. And I just kept praying like this.
Wow.
I was terrified. Anyway,
Can I ask, was it the terrified, like that you would just be displeasing your church and family authorities, or that you actually were about to be like, have an evil presence near you that might harm you? Okay.
Both. Santa was synonymous with evil, right? Yeah. And so I didn't want to have anything to do with that. But what was even more frightening to me was that I would not be loyal to Jehovah. If I met Santa Claus, I was somehow being disloyal to God, and I didn't want to have that confrontation. So
like you're collaborating with the enemy.
Yeah, exactly. So the teacher called me out of the class and asked me to go down to the canteen to get her some orange juice. And so I went, okay. I ran down. Like all the classrooms being pulled out where they're all lining up. I've been given the assignment to go to the canteen. So I run down to the canteen, praying the whole time, over and over again. Get down to the canteen. Canteen ladies say to me, what are you doing up? You're supposed to be meeting Santa. I went, no, Mrs. I can't even remember her name. She wanted me to get her orange juice. So I'm here to get the orange juice. So I get the orange juice. Somehow when I get back, Santa's been and gone. It's finished. It's all done. And then I realize, Jehovah must have answered my prayer by getting the teacher to ask me to go down to the canteen. He heard my prayer. I was convinced from that that Jehovah saw my anxiety, and he relieved it by motivating the teacher to give me a different task, and I was saved from having to meet Santa Claus. And so that afternoon, I ran home to tell Mum and Dad that Jehovah had answered my prayer.
Like it was a minor miracle, almost.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What a crazy story. It's amazing the things that the mind can do.
Yeah.
In terms of the things like that, where you kind of think you see the good side, before we talk about some of the, I'm sure, harder parts of this, what were the good parts of it that you recall? And I guess maybe, do you recall just really sensing that God was real? When you prayed, did you sense he was actually, they were listening to you, that there was, like a sense of like anxiety, and then he gave you peace on a regular basis? And did you ever sense this idea, especially as you get older, that he's like leading you, like, if you said, God, I don't know which door to open, which door, and he kind of leads you to the one. Did you get that sense that there was a presence there that was actually doing something?
Yes, I did. I was convinced as a child that I did have communication with Jehovah, and in my teenage years, what you just described is very much my experience. And that I remember I would have been about 15, and I was wanting to dedicate my life. So Jehovah's Witnesses don't baptize or what's the other word? No, it is baptism. Christening. That's the one I was after. They don't do that. They believe that each individual has the choice, the decision to make themselves to dedicate their lives to Jehovah, and that you do that by means of a dedication prayer, and then you symbolize that dedication by full water immersion. So at the age of 15, I had come to the conclusion that that it was the truth, and that I wanted to dedicate my life to Jehovah. And I remember that prayer, that dedication prayer, vividly, because I felt like there was presence there. And as I prayed that night and told Jehovah what I wanted to do for him, one of the kingdom melodies, one of the songs, one of the hymns of the religion, the words popped into my head. And the words that popped into my head were, "I will help you reach your goal." So again, it was another thing that convinced me that I had this very close-knit relationship with a creator.
Just for sake of my understanding of the doctrine, can I ask a few quick questions? We can go through this part real quickly. Original sin, did they believe the moment you were born you were a sinner? Okay.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And they take it actually a step further, I feel.
Okay.
I'd be interested to hear what you think on this, actually. So yes, you're born imperfect. That Adam and Eve's sin in the Garden of Eden dented the cake tin mold, right? So every cake that then's made out of that mold has got the same dent, right? So imperfection is this sin that you inherit, and there's nothing you can do about it. So,
and is that enough
always a sinner?
Is that enough to condemn you to eternal punishment? That sin alone?
Well,
you inherit?
Yes.
Okay.
Another little caveat: Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in hell.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
They do not. No, they do not believe in a hellfire, where you are eternally punished. They don't believe in an immortal soul either. They believe that you are the soul, you the person. It's not some intrinsic force separate from the body. They believe that when Adam was created and God breathed the breath of life, the Genesis account in their version of the scriptures says that he became a living soul. So they reason that it was the breath of life in conjunction with the body that caused Adam to then become a soul, and that the soul can die. So where was I going with that?
So there's no hellfire waiting for bad people.
Yeah, no, there's no hellfire. All there is eternal non-existence. So when you die, you don't know anything. You cease to exist completely.
Okay. So there's no purgatory just you're in or you're out. It's very black and white.
Extremely black and white. Extremely black and white. Yeah, that's right.
And you mentioned good.
No, sorry. I was just we talked about hellfire, but there was a question that you were asked. Oh, yes, about sin and imperfection. And that when you're born, that imperfection automatically will deviate you to the eternal non-existence path. It's only on developing that close relationship with Jehovah and accepting the ransom value of Jesus Christ's sacrifice that you can possibly achieve the other option. However, even that is it's not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee at all. So they have this concept of not grace, but undeserved kindness. So they say that Jehovah extends this undeserved kindness to you because you are a sinner, because you are imperfect, of having the opportunity to live forever on paradise earth on the basis of Christ's sacrifice, but it's undeserved, right? And that does something to your view of yourself, that nothing you can do will ever make you worthy, ever. Even though you have faith in Christ's sacrifice and you expend your life in a way where you show very clearly that your faith is the first thing and the most important thing to you, you still don't deserve it. And they use, I think it's the scripture in Zephaniah that says that that even if you keep seeking, you may be concealed in the day of God's anger. You may. It's not a guarantee.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's interesting. I didn't know about the hell part of it. That's fascinating that there's no real place, at least for the the Hitlers of the world. But it's an interesting difference. I'm curious with the whole you're bad. Did you? I mean, it sounds very similar in the sense that a lot of people grow up feeling very broken, and you wouldn't, of course, describe it that way when you're in it because you just feel like it's not like I'm struggling with this concept of am I broke or not. It's just a given. It's not like a let's debate this and let's figure out how much I believe in it. It's there. We know it's true, so to speak. We know you're broken. We know you're sinful. We know you've fallen short of the glory of God. We know that God is a God who demands perfection, and you've fallen way short, and that He does in fact demand, according to Protestant theology, He demands a sacrifice. He demands some kind of punishment, either punish you for your sins or someone in your place, in your stead. And the hope, of course, of the gospel, the beauty of the gospel, so to speak, from their perspective, is that Jesus' death and resurrection creates the context for Him to cover your sins. And so that you, kind of like a judge would say, you, Sherrie, owe me $100 billion, and something you could never pay, even if you worked for forever, you'd never pay it. You'd never even pay the interest. Like, you owe me $100 billion. And it's like He says, I'm going to take Christ's righteousness and I'm going to put it on you. I'm going to completely pay your debt, but I'm not just bringing you to zero. I'm giving you the righteousness of Christ. You're now positive $100 billion. He's covering you. He's taking care of your sin issue, and he's giving you the righteousness, so that when I look at you, I don't look at you as just purely, oh, I forgive you. Like, I look at you as actually righteous. It's as if you were righteous because He sees you as being in Christ. Would you say it's similar for Jehovah's Witnesses?
There is some similarities, but there are some nuances in there that are different. So, for example, and this starts to get deep, and so I'm worrying if my memory is going to hold up, but here we go. I've mentioned that the main hope is earthly, that will live on paradise earth.
Right.
Jehovah's Witnesses do believe, though, that there is a group that does go to heaven. They believe that the heavenly class, those that will go to heaven, are going to be rulers with Christ in God's kingdom. Basically, they'll be the administration of God's kingdom. They take Revelation, they pick and choose what parts of Revelation they say are symbolic and what's real.
Right. As do Protestants, very much.
So Revelation, the mention of the 144,000 that stand before the throne, right? That 144,000 they believe is the literal number of faithful believers from earth that go to heaven to form the priestly and the kingly rule of God's kingdom. So
are women allowed to be in that group?
Yes, funny enough, women can actually be part of the 144,000. How the 144,000 are selected is, it's an extremely personal thing. They take Romans 8 about that, Abba, Father. It's a very personal thing. Do I know that I was going to live on earth? Yes, because I don't see myself living in heaven. So that's the assurity that those who believe they're going to heaven, well, they've been assigned that.
Would the traditional church leaders have a better chance at having been pulled into that group, like the main church leaders?
Yes, the ones right at the top. So that's the governing body. There are 8 men currently in upstate New York who are the governing body members. And yes, each of those have the heavenly hope. They are of the 144,000. So the 144,000 or members of that, they are the only ones that can partake of the wine and the bread at memorial. So Jehovah's Witnesses don't have communion where you're always partaking of the bread and the wine. It is only ever done once per year on Nisan 14. And only the 144,000 can partake of the wine and the bread. The rest of us, we just observe that. So this is where it comes to another level. I'm circling back to your original question. The value of Christ's sacrifice is primarily applied to the 144,000. Because the rest of us aren't going to heaven, we get the benefit of what has been put in place for the 144,000. But it's kind of a two-tier system here. So you have your heavenly hope Christians, and then you have your earthly hope Christians, but we're kind of just tag-alongs.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, we just get the extra benefit, but most of it is set up for the heavenly class. So and that's where it can devolve into all kinds of craziness at that point.
So you're growing up knowing your likelihood of being in that upper class is slim to none. I would guess most people probably feel that way,
Yes.
unless you're high in the church or something, or you're some kind of super missionary saint or something.
Yeah.
What would they have said in terms of your walk with Christ? Like what would it take for you to just be completely obeying Christ? Like as a teenager, like what would it have meant for you? And do you recall moments like that where you felt like, whatever God has put in front of me to do, I am doing it with my whole heart, and this is what it looks like. And I am as right with God as I possibly can be, both in terms of my, my belief system, but also my lifestyle. What would a good Jehovah's Witness teenager look like?
I giggle because you just described what I was endeavoring to be. So at 15, I decided to dedicate my life to God. And what that means, the type of person I am, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to throw all of my energies into it to show that I'm sincere, that I really want to do what I've said I'm going to do. And so I decided at that same time of the dedication prayer that I was going to become a regular pioneer. In fact, that decision I'd made when I was 9. So
you said a pioneer?
Yeah, a regular pioneer. So what that means is, as I think probably the most common thing that Jehovah's Witnesses are known for is their door-to-door work,
right?
Preaching. So that is not negotiable, by the way, for any Jehovah's Witness. If you are a Jehovah's Witness, it is part and parcel that you not only attend the meetings, but you must be out preaching. You absolutely have to be out preaching. If you are not out preaching and sharing the good news of God's kingdom, then how dedicated are you? And you're not demonstrating by your life course that you are really exercising true faith. So you must go preaching. Now, the average Jehovah's Witness is called a kingdom publisher. And the average, each country may vary a little bit, but the average time that a publisher will spend in the door-to-door work is around 10 to 12 hours per month. A pioneer is someone who dedicates a lot more time than that. And there are different levels of pioneers. So the first level is, this is back at this time, it's changed a little bit since, but back at when I was 15, an auxiliary pioneer would do 60 hours per month of door-to-door work. And you could opt to be an auxiliary pioneer month on, month off. So you could do 1 month here and then not do it for a while and then do another month there. That's auxiliary pioneering. Regular pioneering, which is what I wanted to do, this was every month. You are dedicating to do this full time. And at that stage, it was 90 hours per month. It's unpaid. You're a volunteer. So you have to support yourself with part-time work. And as I said, I decided at the age of 9, I wanted to be a regular pioneer. So at the age of 16, I left school in year 10. Education is not encouraged. Surprise, surprise.
So but being a pioneer, literally, was that mostly about going door to door, or was there other jobs you could do as a pioneer?
No, pioneering is the ministry. It is preaching. Okay. That is the main function of it. There's little elements to that where you could be conducting home Bible studies where someone has actually expressed an interest in wanting to learn about the Bible and you're teaching them about the Bible. So it may not, but you've met them by knocking on their doors most of the time. you could also do street witnessing, where you'd literally stand in the streets with a watchtower and a wake.
Okay.
You could do business territory, which was terrifying, and that's why I signed myself up for it, because business territory, where you're actually going to commercial properties or a high tower, and you're trying to speak to the managers of businesses, because they're so involved at work, you're not going to knock on their door at home. They're not going to be home. So go to where they are, right?
Interesting.
All sorts of different forms, car park witnessing, like there was just petrol station witnessing.
So they thought of everything, and the goal was just to bring people into the church, it sounds like.
Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately it's recruitment, but they don't put it in those terms. They say that it's a warning work, because Armageddon's coming, right?
Yeah.
So you're going out there to save people from Armageddon.
Did they have this sense too, like if you don't do this, it's kind of like their blood is on your hands?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Very, very much so. So Ezekiel, with a mark on the forehead, and yeah, very much so, there's blood in your hands. In fact, one of the, I'm not going to say beloved, because I'd be incredibly sarcastic, one of the governing body members, Tony Morris, gave a talk to Trinidad, and he was exactly on this point of, how much preaching are you doing? If you missed it for a week, have you missed it for a week? Are you looking down at your hands? What do you see on your hands? What does Jehovah see on your hands? Is there blood on them? So this is literal, that is what they teach. That is what they teach. So yeah, I became a regular pioneer at the age of 16, and continued until I was 26. So I did 10 years of 90 hours a month, and I thought that at that point in time that I was the closest that I could be, but I even judged myself within that period of time that I still wasn't doing enough, because after I left home at 19, I moved in with some other regular pioneers, and we went to a congregation that had no pioneers. So that's called Serving Where the Need is Great. So I went to go do that, because, as a woman too, you don't have many options to, there's no positions for women at all. Being a regular pioneer is pretty much it. The only other positions that you can then attain are on are off the back of your husband. So you might be an elder's wife, or you might even be a circuit overseer's wife, but you can never attain to that yourself. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, can I ask you a few quick questions?
Yeah, sure.
And I want to make a really brief comment, and then ask you a few clarifying questions from some stuff you said a few minutes ago. But it's interesting that the whole blood on your hands thing, and this is just my opinion on this, but it almost feels like it's ironic that that's the message that Jehovah's Witnesses would give when they're basically preaching an nihilistic outcome of, like, if you don't believe, sorry, but you just stop. Whereas, evangelical Protestant Christians, a lot of them, I mean, not all of them for granted, but a lot of them would say, if you don't believe, you burn literally forever and ever and ever. And so it really puts on this sense of, like, look, why would you do almost anything to just relax or to enjoy yourself? Like, you work hard to enter into rest. The rest comes when you enter the kingdom. You work hard now. Why would you stop? Like, if it's almost like, if you could paint it this way, if you had, say, I've got 4 little kids, and say we're in a big house, and suddenly I find out, I'm on the first floor, and the second floor, there's a fire, a massive fire, and I can hear the kids screaming. And of course, I would do everything I could to run up and save them.
Yep. And
so let's say that you went up and you grabbed 2 of them, but there's still 2 left. You stuck 2 in the front. They're in the lawn, in the garden, but there's 2 left still upstairs, and you have a chance, a clear shot at getting up the stairs to their room and getting them out before that fire takes them out. Who in their right mind is going to flip the TV on at that point? Who's going to go take a ride to the restaurant? This is so critical. You have to get them out of that house, and you have to get them out now. And it's
Yep.
amazing to me the way that so many Christians would claim to believe, and this is where I think there is a little bit of cognitive dissonance, where I suspect a lot of people actually don't truly believe it. And that's why they can get away with it and say, yeah, I'll go to the football game and cheer on my favorite team. I'll focus, I'll spend all kinds of time on CNN watching the politics and, debating COVID vaccine stuff. Like there's all these little topics that people get into. And it's like, it doesn't matter if you think your neighbors are going to burn in hell, nothing else matters. But
Right.
again, in my opinion, I suspect that some people truly don't believe it. And that's why how they get away with it is they would claim to believe it as their belief system, but their worldview says they would never verbalize this, but they'd say there's no way that can be true.
Right. Yeah. I agree with what you're saying. And I'm not sure whether, because the idea of non-existence may be more realistic than a eternal hellfire, that actually has a bit more power to manipulate. There could be some merit to that. Certainly the social pressure, the cultural pressure of if you don't do everything you can, then you're not just hurting Jehovah by not being there, you are actually hurting the rest of your family and all of your members in the congregation by showing that you're not taking it. You're not showing that it's first place in your life. You're being blasé about it, which means you don't really care about the rest of your family. So there's this social dynamic within it that adds to the whole pressure.
Yeah. And even Revelation, I forget if it's chapter 2 or 3 or something, it talks about one of the churches where Jesus says, if you're lukewarm, I'll spew you out of my mouth. Like I don't want you hot or cold. I want you to be completely hot, like on fire for God.
Was that Laodicea?
Probably, yeah.
I think Laodicea was the lukewarm one. Yeah, I'm going to spit you out, neither hot nor cold. Yes.
Yeah. A few quick questions going back a second. What does Nisan 14 mean?
Oh, sorry. So that is the Jewish calendar. That was the date of Christ's death.
So do Jehovah's Witnesses use the Jewish calendar then?
Correct. Okay. Yeah, so for the purposes of that, yes.
Okay.
So
interesting.
The memorial night will change every year, obviously, depending on what the calendar is, and it won't always coincide with Easter. And that 24-hour period is very solemn for Jehovah's Witnesses the world around. So yeah, you don't miss Memorial Night. You miss Memorial Night, there's something seriously wrong with you.
You mentioned Jehovah's Witnesses scriptures, and I just want to make sure I ask this question. As far as you know, are they vastly different from a Protestant Bible? And like, what are the differences? And do they have certain translations that they prefer, or do they make their own translation? Like, how does that work?
So they used to use the King James the most, okay. But then
why does that not surprise me?
Why does that not surprise you? Yes. And then around the 50s and 60s, they wrote their own. They translated their own. It's called the New World Translation.
Okay.
And it has had several reiterations.
But that's the one that they would ask you to use all the time?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
Interesting.
The most notable difference in the translation is that they say they restore the divine name back to the Bible. And that is the Tetragrammaton, the YHWH. And they will argue that the correct English, well, the closest you can get is Jehovah to that. You learn when you leave that was actually just a 13th century monk that came up with that idea that it was Jehovah. But anyway, that's probably the biggest difference, is that they put Jehovah in the Bible about 7,000 times. Wherever the Tetragrammaton, they say, appeared is where they put Jehovah. That's the biggest difference. There are some other differences too that you can really get into a theological discussion about. John 1:1 being one of the most notable, with the indefinite article a.
So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yes. So I can remember debating that with Christians that I would meet during
Oh
my
yeah.
years pioneering.
And of course, we as Protestants got all the preparation. I'm sure I could have gotten a lot more than I did, but the preparation to join in those arguments, and it's amazing. Does it ever amaze you? It's almost like I think it was a meme or something, but like, you know how kids will sometimes make up an imaginary friend. And so I guess in some cases it gets a little bit out of hand where it's not just like a little quirky thing. It's like they can't stop believing it for years at a time or something. And so the picture or meme or something was like that these two parents were praying desperately that to God that their child would be cured of this imaginary friend. And it's like, do you not see the irony here?
That is gold.
Ugh, it's like
that
crazy.
is gold. Yeah. And that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Well, what I meant to ask you, you've touched on this a little bit, but patriarchy. Men, it sounds like, lead the church. What is a woman's role in the church, and is there any real option? I see. Is that a cat? Is that one of your?
Yes, sorry about that. He decided to join us.
That was funny. So, like, I know for a lot of Protestant Christian women, the best life in some ways. I mean, there's like some exceptions to this, like missionaries or whatever, or really good nurses or doctors. But most women would say the best life is to be, raising a family, preferably a big one. We want to outbreed the pagans. A big family to be a little army of soldiers for Jesus, in a very good and loving sense, but to be able to just have focus on the home. And of course, you mentioned like if your husband is in ministry, as bonus points, you're really making a difference now. Is that similar, or are there some uniquenesses that would be different for women in the Jehovah's Witness church?
It's fairly similar. Women, they are, well, they're viewed as the army that is mainly responsible or mainly does the most in the ministry because of the fact that they are largely homemakers. So they do the bulk of it while the men are looking after their families, but they go out preaching in the weekends. They can have positions within the congregation. They can become ministerial servants and elders, and even more than that. Women can be pioneers, as I've mentioned already. So as a woman, you only have a few options of what it is that you can do. And for a period of time in the organization, certainly this was my experience in the 80s, having a family was not promoted at all.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. Again, because of this Armageddon teaching.
Okay.
Now, to understand that, you've got to understand another thing about Jehovah's Witnesses and the reason why they think it is so now, it's going to happen now. And that's because they believe that we are living in the last days that Jesus Christ spoke about in Matthew 24. They believe that the last days started in 1914. So if you look at 1914 and you see how many, we're over 100 years past that now, but imagine we're back in the 80s, right, where it's, you're 80 odd years, nearly 70, from World War I. They felt that Armageddon was knocking on the door. It was going to be here any moment. So why would you be having children now? You should be doing everything you can to promote, to warn people and get them in, help save them, before the door on the ark closes. And so that was the rhetoric I heard as a child, was you don't have children. So for me, I was not thinking of having children. I was thinking of being a really good regular pioneer, hoping that I would marry someone who had the same intensity of worship that I did. And Sasha was a regular pioneer as well. In fact, he was a Bethelite, which was something I couldn't do. And I wanted to, but I couldn't because I was a woman. Bethel is the headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses. So in each of the countries, they will have a Bethel. Of course, the main headquarters is in the US, in New York state. But here in Sydney, it's only 20 minutes away from us, there is a Bethel here. And
like just Sasha, one per country?
Yeah, now they've actually sold a few of them and amalgamated. So New Zealand no longer has a Bethel, for example. That got amalgamated into Australia. So Australia oversees both now. But
I guess
back in the heyday,
God wasn't powerful enough to pay the bills, huh?
no, right. So yeah, there used to be Bethels just about in every country. And they had need for workers. So young men, if they applied to Bethel, they had a really high chance of getting in. I applied 4 years running. No. As a woman, you really don't have much to offer. But anyway, Sasha served in Bethel for about 5 years, and we got married in 1999. So I did not see having a family as important, not until I got into my 30s and my biological clock just started ticking. But by then, it was a bit too late for us because of my health. I have endometriosis, and that was going to make it very hard for me to conceive. In fact, it got to the stage where the doctors were saying, only way this is probably going to happen is with IVF. Now, IVF is a whole other conundrum for Jehovah's Witnesses. Not so much in that you can't do it. You can do it if it is the father's sperm and the mum's egg. Okay, we can work with that. No surrogacy, no nothing like that. Has to be proper. But the issue becomes if there are many fertilized eggs, you can't just leave them in a freezer because that's life. They're fertilized. So what are you going to do about that? And because that overwhelmed Sasha and I, were like, well, you have no control over how many eggs may be fertilized and how many are in a freezer, and you can't leave them there, and you certainly can't destroy them. We just went, no. And so on the basis of religion, we made a decision to not have a family. And then we wake up after that and realize it's all not true.
Can I ask, with a kind of a very related question, but sexuality, like if you people are obviously encouraged, as you said, not to pursue marriage, but you would think, in the sense of, like, the Bible clearly says it's better to marry than to burn. I'm not sure how the Jehovah's Witness version would phrase that, but the idea is you're burning in lust, you're burning in passion. Paul says he wishes that people would be like him, meaning unmarried. But if you can't, it is better to marry than to burn. But even himself says what you're saying about, he talks about, I would prefer that you live as if you're not, married, because the end is coming. He talks about that, and I think in Corinthians. But, you look just at the biological facts of, a man. I forget the exact number, but I think a man's body produces like 50,000 sperm an hour or something. Whatever it is, it's a huge number. And obviously, it's a cliche. We all know that, men are very sexually driven. And obviously, as a woman, women may be more sheltered from some of that, at least in evangelical circles they are. But, you come into your own, you figure out how your body works at some point, and you realize, women are also interested in that part of life. How would a young person and a young couple, say a couple gets married at 20, 21, how do they deal with this conundrum of, like, we obviously want you to be proper and have a good marriage, and we assume a good marriage includes intimacy, but yet you're expected to not have children? Do they encourage a lot of birth control? Is that how they do that, or natural family planning kind of stuff?
Yeah, so they don't get into the detail of that. That's a personal choice that they will leave to you, except if there is anything that would be abortive in nature. So it comes with that caveat. So yes, the pill, condoms, that's all fine. But as soon as you start to get into things like IUDs, where it could be abortive, or the morning after pill, then you're in trouble. No, that's not acceptable at all. So there's those kind of principles.
Do you see any like Duggar type families where it's just 12, 15 kids? Do they do that kind of thing?
Not as like the Mormons do. No, you don't see it as much. There are big families, yes, but not on that scale. Gotcha. And it's more, I think, you'll see families with 2 or 3, sometimes 4, but not generally more than that. And I mean, that's now, but there was a period of time during the 80s particularly that there were just hardly children at all in congregations. And then in the 90s, people started to have more families. And I think the organization had to adapt and change its approach a bit. So they have become, it's so manipulative. It is just so manipulative. They've become more accepting of children, but they use them now. Children really are where their numbers are going to come from, because they're not getting the numbers from recruitment anymore. The heyday was the 70s, 80s, 90s. That's when the organization was booming. It had gone from being in the tens of thousands to now in the millions. Then it started to slow in the 2000s, I believe, because of the advent of the internet and people being able to Google and see that the theology just doesn't stand up. A lot of what they preach just does not work. So, where was I going there, Tim? Now I've just lost my train of thought.
Well, it's a good segue, though, because this is the point where I wanted to start to ask you about your story. So could I ask, though, as we start down the path of what took you out, maybe a precursor question, did you ever know anybody who had left Jehovah's Witnesses in your childhood or young adulthood that was like an example? And if you did, or even if you could have imagined it, what would the church's response have been to someone like that?
So I didn't know anybody personally. I would hear it anecdotally about ones in another congregation that had been a pioneer or had been an elder, and now they've left and they've gone to another church. And I couldn't understand it. I could not understand. How would you leave? Why would you? And if you left, why would you go to another religion? Like, just, this is the truth. I just couldn't understand that. I did have one that I did know, and that affected me quite profoundly. After
like a friend of yours?
Well, yes, but a high up, like it was after you do 1 year of regular pioneering, you have the opportunity to attend a 2-week pioneer school, a Bible school. And so I, at the tender age of 17, went to my pioneer school, and there were 2 teachers, 2 school teachers. One of them was a circuit overseer that oversees about 25 congregations. The other was a district overseer, and a district overseer looks after several circuits. And that district overseer, I really liked him. He was a really down-to-earth man, very kind, very warm. I loved his wife. We just got on really well. In fact, it was because of his influence that I left home at 19 and moved to the other congregation. And a few years later, I hear that he and his wife have left. And not only have they left, they've turned apostate. Right? So it's one thing to leave the organization and go somewhere else. It's another thing entirely to turn your back on the religion completely. And that's what they'd done. I was just absolutely, I could not understand it. It had a very big impact.
I'd imagine. Yeah, especially like you said, the way you described it is exactly what I would have described it. Like, where else are you going to go? It's like that, that joke that people sometimes say, like, if you're in a town where there's only one electric company, and you call them up and say, hey, I don't want your services anymore. You guys have terrible customer service. It's like, where else are you going to go? You have no electric options. We're the only company in town. Like, and as a Christian, like, if you know that this is the glory of God, the glorious gospel, his love, his blessing, is the hope of future glory, like, what do you have left except darkness? You're literally, it's like you're blinding yourself on purpose. Like, who would do such a thing? And it's crazy. It makes no sense when you're in it.
No, so they will use John. I now forget exactly where the scripture is, but I'm sure you'll know where I'm going with this. It was after Jesus had made a statement about eating blood, and part of the disciples were so shocked at what he said that they left. And Jesus says to Peter, "What you heard me say it, you haven't left." And Peter turned around and went, "Well, you have sayings of everlasting life. Where else would we go?
Yeah.
How else? Where else would we go?" And so that they use that scripture all the time, right? If there's something that you don't understand about the organization, if there's some change, something's happened, but you don't understand it, well, where else are you going to go? So, and you probably don't understand it because you don't understand it. So that's your problem. You just got to have faith and keep enduring.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the Timothy's talks about people making a shipwreck of their lives. And I think it's Hebrews talks about once you walk away from the sacrifice of Jesus, like there is no other sacrifice left. Like you can't say, I'll pass this one up, but I'll take the next train. Like there was no other train coming. He's the only sacrifice. Right. And of course the unpardonable sin, things like that, which I know people argue about what it is, but you basically are in a sense doing something that's technically unpardonable because you basically said, God, I reject your perfect sacrifice. God cannot do anything else for you. He's already done everything for you, and you've said no, thank you.
You're grieving the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. So did that, I'm just curious before we dive into your details, did that part of, like the impact of that, did it make you want to question and like track them down if you could, or if you could have, and said, hey, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, I would like to know, why did you leave? What happened? Or were they just like, you're the enemy, the devil's got you? Or like, how would you have seen them?
The message that I took from it was, wow, if even ones like that can leave, then I really need to be on my guard. There was no curiosity as to what was it that made them change. Like how could they have, what was the process? How did they get to it? I just saw it as, wow, if Satan can be that crafty to take people out like that, then I've really got to be on guard. I've really got to be careful. That was the way I saw it.
Yeah. And I would say we as Christians, evangelicals, would add in a lot of the whole demonic
yes, of course,
side of it, where Satan's especially like if you got into the Frank Peretti stuff where there's demons literally like flying all around, constantly trying to get your attention. But like even if it's not like quite that bizarre, it's like Satan is doing everything he can to undo the things God has been doing, and it's almost like this implication of like, I mean, I wouldn't have said a pastor ever said this. This is my impression of it, but it's almost like God is kind of like, if God could technically look away for a second, it's like Satan's just watching like a little kid. When mama turns away, I'm going to get the candy. It's like when God turns away for 1 second because there's a world war going on or something, and God's got to be focused on that. Some horrible thing. God's distracted. In that second, Satan's like just waiting for you. A demon's waiting for you, and he's going to get you. And it also, the whole curiosity thing gets destroyed because whether you're talking about someone exploring their sexuality or digging into like maybe Catholicism's right, maybe this religion's right, you just like, I don't even want to see it because it's like, for us, it was, the big one was Ouija boards. I don't know if you ever had that.
Yes. That was it.
Like, don't even touch it. Don't even touch it.
No, that's right. That's right. Tarot, all of it. Yes. Oh yeah. No, that goes into a whole other field. Like Jehovah's Witnesses very much believe in that kind of spiritual warfare. In fact, they say that because of the war that Revelation describes of Michael, the archangel, well, no, actually, that wasn't. Great war in heaven. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah. But the end result was Satan got cast out of heaven.
Yeah.
And so they believe that since 1914, Satan has been cast down to the earth. He can no longer, go to the earth, go up to the heaven. No, he is stuck here, and he knows that his time is short.
Okay.
So he is walking about like a lion seeking to devour you. These are all scriptures I'm quoting, by the way. So it takes it to a whole other level of what the warfare is like.
Yeah.
Between the angels who are flying about in mid-heaven trying to support the ministry, and Satan and his demons fighting that and looking at any opportunity to target you at the same time. They very much believe that. So things like buying second-hand furniture, do you know where it was before? Do you know if that could have been, if you start to have problems at home, it might be that. You better watch your music, right? Because if you're listening to groups that, if you have some kind of experience, then it might be your music, or it might be the books that you read, or the movies that you watch, or like they're paranoid on that. It could be anything. You are letting Satan in.
Yeah. That's interesting. It seems like you could make a good argument that that would lead to a little bit of paranoia, and maybe when you leave a little bit of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
I was curious. I want to dive in real soon here to your deconversion, but with the whole Armageddon stuff, would they have supported Israel? Like a lot of evangelical Christians, almost some of them were like, Israel can do no wrong. We don't care if they're slaughtering Palestinians and stealing their land. Like, just like God is with Israel, so we are with Israel. Would they feel the same way in the Jehovah's Witness church?
No.
Okay.
And that's because they take a neutral stand to politics. So we don't vote. Jehovah's Witnesses do not vote.
Okay.
Because they have already voted. They've voted for God's kingdom and for spiritual Israel. So the 144,000 are thought of as spiritual Israelites, the new Israel, right? Okay. The new Jerusalem. Israel had its chance, the national, physical Israel had its chance. They rejected Christ. So they have absolutely, they don't enter into any political discourse or discussion at all. You're not encouraged to have any view on any political side of things. It's very much just, it's God's kingdom. You focus on that.
Interesting. I could see, I'd love to ask a few more questions on that at some point, but I definitely want to make sure we carve out time for your story. What happens next? So it sounds like, just to summarize what I think I've heard, you grew up in this very much dedicated, to try to really make a difference for the kingdom. You believed in God. You believed in the worldview that they had, that what the end times were coming, the work of God in your life, certainly the fearfulness of the evil spirits that could be, attacking you. And you were going to go in the straight and narrow, honor God with your life, preach the word, tell people how to be right with God through the door-to-door stuff. Obviously, at some point, something changed, or we wouldn't be speaking here. What were like the early seeds of what began to change all that? Because it's a lot of people don't ever. When you're in that deep, a lot of people never think to even question it, let alone get out. No. What were the early seeds that started that?
So probably the earliest was after Sasha and I got married. We struggled. The first 18 months was really, really hard because we were both still trying to pioneer. Working part-time to support ourselves. I was exhausted. I was burnt out. I can remember working 3 days a week to earn enough income. Sasha was window cleaning. It's a joke within the organization, right? Because we're uneducated, because we can't get higher education. You do whatever menial jobs you can get your hands on, right? So for men, it's hilarious. They're all window cleaners. And it's so funny how many you come across where that's the case. Anyway, so Sasha was doing window cleaning. I was working in a practice as a typist. I was trying to keep the house clean as well, doing all the witness things. I was just so tired. And because Sasha was window cleaning, that's weather dependent. We didn't have stability of income. And we got to a point 18 months in where we just couldn't keep doing it anymore because we weren't able to pay bills. Just praying about it and relying on Jehovah for some kind of miracle to happen was only going to get you so far. You're still left with the bills to pay. And so we ended up approaching the elders and saying, we're going to have to stop pioneering. And this decision gutted me because I had always seen that this is what I was going to do for my life. I was always going to be a pioneer. To actually give that up, I felt like I'd failed. I was just absolutely crushed to stop. And I was also stunned that the elders didn't offer us any support to continue. They instead said, well, you've done your time, right? You've done it quite a lot, right? So you can now live your life.
Like somehow the priorities shifted
Shift.
randomly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was quite stunned at that and a bit disillusioned, but still believed it was the truth. I just felt it was perhaps this elder body that maybe wasn't as dedicated as I had been. And so things started to change for us from that point on, because now the focus did change. We were just trying to survive and earn enough money to pay our expenses, but we still had a very significant share in the ministry, making sure that we were doing 15 to 20 hours a month while working full time and meeting all of our obligations and responsibilities within the organization. So Sasha was a ministerial servant, and that meant that he had talks to deliver and responsibilities to do, and I supported him with that. Fast forward to, we remained like that for quite some time, until about 2009, when we've had the discussion of the decision about having a family or not that I referred to earlier. We decide no. And I'm like, what am I going to do with myself? I toyed with the idea of regular pioneering again. And so I did a few months as an auxiliary pioneer, but the passion wasn't the same anymore. I was actually finding it really hard, because I was with a group of women who were all mothers, and they talk about their children. And I really struggled with that. I felt like I just didn't fit in anymore. I wasn't one of the young ones anymore, the young pioneers that just, that was just fantastic. I loved that. Like, you're socializing with all these young people, and it was those few years were fantastic. But now it just wasn't feeling the same at all. And so I felt like a fifth wheel. And it was actually causing tension in our marriage, because Sasha by this time had started his own business, and he was relying on my support to help him with the business. And here I am going, I'm going to go out door to door preaching. And so it was actually causing friction with us. And I remember having this moment of, if this is how it's going to be, if me striving after trying to pioneer again is going to cause problems with my husband and I'm not going to pioneer. I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to do it. That was actually quite a significant turning point for me. We were still renting, and an opportunity came along not long after this for us to buy a house. And buying a house was okay, now we have a mortgage to pay for. And so I then got myself into full-time work. An opportunity came along for me to become a practice manager of a cancer practice. And I saw that as stable income, and also an opportunity for me to learn and grow. And so I grabbed it with both hands. But being the type of person I am, then in 2012, I'm learning as much as I can. The doctors of the practice came to me and said, we'd like you to do a diploma to become qualified for what you're doing and to learn more. And I saw it as, I'm going to have to, because it really was their trust in me to give me the job in the first place without qualification. So I felt like I owed it to them to do it. But we had to keep it quiet. Sasha was supportive. He was happy for me to do this diploma, but we could not let anyone else in the congregation know, because higher education is not advised. So we kept it quiet. It was a 2-year course, and I really enjoyed learning. Actually, I was learning how to learn, because you weren't told what the answers were. You were given all of this information, and you had to come to your own conclusions. You were taught how to assess that information, how to question it, how to think about it, and then to come to what your conclusions were. And this was novel for me. I'd never had that before. And I noticed while I did this diploma that Sasha's attitude was changing quite a lot. I was starting to miss meetings, because the pressure of trying to do everything was just becoming too much. And the practice management job was a very intense role, extremely intense role. So getting to meetings was really becoming difficult for me. And Sasha never made it hard. He was just, that's fine. Can't make it tonight. Not a problem. I'll go and I'll see you when I get home. He made it okay for me. And then when he'd come home, he'd tell me what happened at the meeting, and that people had come up and, oh, where's Sherrie? Where's Sherrie? Is she not well? Because, you know, that's the only reason you can miss a meeting, is because, you know, something's not right. And Sasha would say, oh no, she's at work. She's I'm so proud of her. She's helping people with cancer, and she's helping doctors do their job, and I'm so proud of her, which left them nowhere to go. But he'd tell me this, so I knew he was defending me at the meetings. I knew something was shifting, something was changing, but I was so busy with everything that I couldn't stop and think. Until 2015, we had employed, in order for me to try to do the diploma and work full time and still be a Jehovah's Witness and help Sasha with his business, we'd employed a young pioneer in the congregation to help with Sasha's bookwork. And that freed me up a little bit to do the diploma, etc., which she didn't know about, of course. We gave her 1 day a week of work. She needed a little bit more work than that 1 day, so I gave her work at the medical practice, because you do that. 2015, she fossicks around on Sasha's work computer and finds that he has been on an online ex-Jehovah's Witness forum, and he hasn't logged out properly. She can see his login. She can see his posts and what comments he's made. And she realizes he's an apostate. She runs to the elders to tell them. The next day, we get a phone call from her saying, I can't work for you anymore. Sasha and I were both in the car at the time, and he says, why? And she says, you know why. And then she says, I've got to go. And she hangs up. Sasha and I are like, what? What's happening? I didn't know what to think. Sasha keeps trying to call her back. She refuses to take his call. So he calls her father, who is one of the elders in the congregation. And this elder says to Sasha, oh, Sasha, we are so upset. We're so upset with what Alyssa told us yesterday. We had an emergency meeting about you this morning. You've been on apostate websites. And Sasha gets off the phone to tell me that that's what the problem is. And all of a sudden, I'm like, you've been on apostate websites? What does this mean? We had a really difficult weekend that weekend, because I learned that Sasha had been doubting the religion for some years. And he'd actually gotten to the point in his deconversion where not only did he no longer believe in the religion, he didn't believe in God. He didn't believe in the Bible. It was a really, really hard weekend for both of us. Me in asking questions that I was terrified to hear his answers to. He being as honest and open as he could, but trying to cushion it for me as much as he could, but terrified with how I would respond. On the Monday after that weekend, I had to go back to work. And guess who was at work that day? It was a very difficult time for me because I couldn't fire her from the practice. I had no grounds to, but I had to work with her. And that was really, really hard.
That'd be terrifying for her, I'd imagine, too. Wondering if you're apostate, too.
Well, I think she'd worked out I wasn't, because I was bewildered. I truly was bewildered. And she did this very selfish focus of, how terrible it was for her. She was so upset. She was so distraught because this was Sasha, and she loved the two of us. I believe she did love the two of us because we provided her income for her and we had a friendship with her. So I do believe she was quite upset as well, but that's the angle she saw it in. And so I had to maintain professionalism and let's just be about work. I had the elders calling me because Jehovah's Witnesses have, and we're going to touch on this later anyway, but the Jehovah's Witnesses have this thing that if there is an accusation brought against a member, there has to be 2 witnesses to it. If it is just on the basis of 1 witness, they can't take action. And by take action, that means they have an internal judicial process. They set up judicial committees, which are 3 elders that will question the individual that's accused of whatever, and they then make decisions based on that individual. Repercussions can range from a private reproof where nobody knows about it to a public reproof where there is an announcement made. You can be put on restrictions, which means that privileges that you have will be like you won't be allowed to answer. You won't, for men, you won't be allowed to give talks. You won't be allowed to give prayer. You won't be allowed to hold the microphones. There's all these different things that they'll take away from you.
What does give answer mean?
Oh, so there's a few of the meetings that they have where there's audience participation, where they'll ask questions from the platform and you can put your hand up and make an expression of faith, right?
Okay.
You can give an answer. That's what that is. You won't be allowed to do that perhaps as a punishment. The biggest weapon they have in their arsenal is disfellowshipping, because when they disfellowship you and you're cast out of the organization, the effect is immediate. You are not going to be spoken to. You are going to be shunned completely from everyone that you know and love, including your family. So
that's unbelievable.
So I knew that.
Meaning even your very spouse is supposed to shun you? Well,
yeah. Like you live in the same household, so you're going to have to communicate to a degree because you're in the same household. You can't not talk to them. But you would not talk to them about spiritual things. You would not talk to them about the congregation. There is this chasm of things that you just do not discuss. So for me, the word apostate's in my head now, because he's been on these websites and he doesn't believe. I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to say, well, I'm in spiritual endangerment now because my head no longer believes. He can't lead me anymore. I actually have grounds to leave him. And I would be supported by the congregation to do that. I wouldn't be allowed to remarry because there's been no adultery. There's been no immorality to break the bond. But I would be fully supported in leaving Sasha because I would be spiritually endangered. So on that Monday night, as I drove home from work, it was my custom, because the commute was quite significant. It was my custom to always call Sasha to say I'm on my way home. So I call him that first night, and he's in tears. He's really upset and distressed. I'm like, what's wrong? Are you okay? And he says to me, are you going to leave me? And I went, no, I'm not going to leave you. We've been married 16 years at this point. He's a good man. I love him. I'm not going to leave him because he's having a crisis. But the elders were calling me that week, and I worked out. I'm like, okay, you've only got one witness. You need a second witness. You're trying to get me to come up with something so that on the basis of my testimony, you can disfellowship my husband. I don't want any part of this. I'm not doing it. So I had one conversation with one elder, and I was really careful about what I said. I did it from a more compassionate basis of, I'm worried for my husband. I'm concerned for him. When I got home and I told Sasha that this elder had called, he said, how did you feel about it? I said, I felt really uncomfortable because I feel like I'm dobbing you in. I'm speaking about you, and I'm not comfortable with that. So Sasha called this elder and said, please don't call my wife. It's not appropriate. She's not feeling comfortable with this. Anyway, over the next few weeks, they tried to call a meeting. They kept calling Sasha and saying, which other elder would you like us to meet you with? And Sasha was, no. If you want to have a friendly chat over a coffee, I'm more than happy to do that. If you want to make this more, I'm not going to participate. And so somehow he didn't participate. We went to one meeting after this.
Like a church service or
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. On a Sunday we went to a final meeting, and I had never felt so uncomfortable in a Kingdom Hall than that day, because it was obvious that the grapevine had gone into overdrive. Everyone knew. And you could tell from the looks on people's faces, the way they looked at Sasha, the way they looked at me. It was so uncomfortable. And the elder that had been phoning me, he came up to us and talked with us before the meeting. He stayed with us until the meeting started. And then when the meeting started, he went and sat with his family. And as soon as the meeting ended, he was back talking to us. And I realized, you're actually watching over us because you don't want anyone to talk to Sasha because you're scared what he might say to someone. They were in full protective mode of the rest of the congregation, and they saw Sasha as a threat. I just didn't have, I know, and I didn't have the heart to go to another meeting after that. So we just stopped attending meetings from 2015, just stopped.
When you stop, is that considered like an act of effective apostasy too, or is that allowed to stop for a time?
So you become known as inactive.
Okay.
Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses call it fading, where you just, some do a slow fade where they just start dropping meeting attendance and not being out witnessing so much, and they slowly filter it off until they're not doing anything. So you become inactive. So we kind of went into instant inactivity. I think the elders were actually scared of Sasha to a degree, because at one point the harassment was so much that Sasha said to them, look, appreciate appropriate boundaries, please. And if you keep harassing, I will avail myself of legal means. And an elder said to him, are you threatening us? He said, no, I'm just reminding you of appropriate boundaries. They stopped contacting after that. It was crickets. We heard nothing. And for me, I was then dealing with a whole other range of emotions of, well, clearly I'm not important because nobody's checking up on me at all. I don't have anybody contacting me to say, are you okay? No, I was just collateral damage. And the shunning was instant, because Sasha was, even though we weren't disfellowshipped, nothing had happened from that point of view. But because the apostate word for Sasha had come out, we were instantly shunned from everyone in the congregation. You'd see them down at the supermarket, they just turn away, like just instant.
Wow.
Our families, though, were not in the congregation. So my parents weren't there. Sasha's parent, who is a witness, his mother's not a witness, they weren't there. So they kept talking to us because they didn't actually know what had happened. And Sasha and I had chosen at that point not to tell them, because how do you do that? And we were trying to still work out us. So we didn't actually go there.
I got to just say, I'm looking for the right time to say it, but I just want to make sure I put it out there. It sounds like your husband has an absolute heart of gold. Between the way that he protected you in terms of you're doing work for doctors and helping cancer patients, the way he was just torn over how it affected you, and his love is wanting to protect your marriage. I mean, just from the little I know of him, he sounds like he's an absolutely amazing. I mean, he sounds like he's kind of the hero of this story so far.
I've got more to tell you about that, because he really is. He's I don't know how he had the patience that he had. I wasn't to understand it until I actually woke up. So I'll move along to that. It was only a few months after that we stopped attending meetings in the July and the August. A little thing called the Australian Royal Commission into Institutional Response to Child Sexual Abuse happened here in Sydney, in Australia, sorry. And the Jehovah's Witnesses were investigated for this. And the hearings happened in July and August of 2015. We'd only just stopped going to meetings. So I knew the commission was happening because Sasha said it was happening, but I couldn't listen to it. I couldn't watch it. It was enough for me at this point in time, what had been happening with Sasha and I couldn't look at anything. So he was telling me little tidbits. Like he told me that Terence O'Brien, who was the branch coordinator in Bethel for Australia. He'd testified. And then he tells me that one of the governing body, Jeffrey Jackson, was interviewed. And he just said it didn't go well. I couldn't ask any more than that. That was enough for me. So he's still withheld, right? Sasha's he doesn't believe, it's just, but that's all he says. He doesn't say anything else.
With that commission, you're saying like they were making accusations that maybe some of the church leaders were doing some inappropriate things?
Yes. Yes. I couldn't know more about it at that stage. And throughout the following months, Sasha would just drop little breadcrumbs, basically, and he did it in a way that was just so kind. It wasn't confrontational, and he didn't burden me with his emotional response to what he'd learned. He'd come up to me and he'd say, "Hey, I've just found this." One of the instances was an Awake magazine where the organisation had quoted a Professor Rama Singh, who is a biologist, I think biologist or an evolutionist, a scientist. Let's go there. They'd quoted him in a way to say that there were quite a number of creationists who were scientists that actually manipulated his quote. Professor Rama Singh found out about it, was very upset about it, wrote a letter to Watchtower wanting it retracted. Watchtower retracts it in their electronic version. In fact, they just remove it. Sorry about that noise. They just remove the comment altogether. No explanation why. So Sasha comes to me with the two versions. And he says, why wouldn't they explain what happened? I don't understand. And I'm like, I don't understand either. And I'm shocked, actually, because I believed that the organisation only made truthful comments and that they were transparent. And here's Sasha showing me that that's not the case. And so I'm shocked with what he's just told me. And then he would just go, yeah, okay. What are we doing for dinner? And he changed the subject. So he was just so kind to me throughout this stage. But it wasn't until November 2016 that I finally got the courage to investigate the Australian Royal Commission myself. On the 28th of November 2016, the Commission released their findings report into case study 29, which was the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it was a report of 110 pages. I was at a Melbourne airport and my flight was delayed by an hour. I text Sasha, I'm delayed. He said, oh, well, you could read the findings report to pass the time. And I sent back saying, no, that'll just piss me off. Because I knew it wasn't going to be good, right? You're not there. It's not going to be good. Anyway, after that text, I'm like, why not? So I Google Australian Royal Commission and I download the report and I start reading this report. And Tim, I will never forget this crowded airport. It was like the sound just turned off. You know, when you're just before you're about to faint, when your ears go really like blocked and loud and everything else just is surreal and you feel like time's just stopped and your heart's pounding. That's what it was like. I'm reading this report and there's no emotion in it. It's just clinical. It's legal. It's facts. And I'm realizing as I'm reading it, it's true. They had found that Bethel in Australia was holding records of 1,006 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse, affecting over 1,800 children, and not one of them had been reported to the police. And they had records of it and kept records of it. The findings report went through 2 testimonies of survivors. And what these women went through was just horrific. It was just horrific. The abuse they suffered from their abusers was horrific enough. The way the organisation, the elders dealt with it was just another level of abuse.
Yeah.
And I realized when I read one of these testimonies that I knew who her abuser was. And I knew the elders involved in terribly mismanaging this case. I knew the circuit overseer, and to read his comments on what he said about this, he said that the elder that abused this woman could serve as an elder again once it had all died down. And that was in writing, and the commission had that as evidence. I was just horrified. I was so horrified. So reading this report, I was just glued to it in the terminal, waiting to get on the plane, in the plane, even at the baggage carousel. I just could not stop reading this thing, and everything was falling apart around me. I realized that if this organization could be guilty of this, it cannot possibly be the truth. It just can't. Those two things can't exist together. You can't say that you have the truth and a perfect theology and doctrine and be guilty of this. I somehow got to work and worked for the rest of the day. And when I got home that night, I walked in the door to Sasha and I just said to him, it's not the truth. It's not the truth. And he said, what? I said, I read the report. I was just gutted. But how lucky I was, Tim, to have Sasha, because he just, he provided the comfort that I needed. He was the soft landing that just helped me get through it. I was just so gutted. That weekend, he helped me watch, because YouTube, being the wonder that it is, has all the videos of the Royal Commission. It's in public, it's the public domain, so you can watch every single testimony and interview. And I just watched them, and I was having all the reactions. I'd stop it and run to Sasha and say, can you believe he said this? I was just off. And like Sasha's, yes, I know, yes. He didn't offload on me any of his reactions or responses. He just let me vent. And then over the next few months, he just, if you want to explore this, you can have a look at this website, or maybe you might find that. And he left me to it. And so I started to learn things then about the theology of the religion and things that I had thought were true and never questioned. So the blood transfusion doctrine, the shunning doctrine itself, the 1914 being the last days. I started to look at all of that and realize all of that wasn't true. And then, Tim, I realized, and I had trouble trying to come to terms with this, that Sasha had gone through all of this before me and I hadn't been there to support him. Somehow he had done this on his own, and that he had sheltered me from his reaction because he cared enough for me to let me go through it myself. He's an incredible man. He really is an incredible man. And I can not use I can't find the right words to describe the strength of our marriage following this, the amount of support that he gave to me. It just took our marriage to a totally different level. So in 2017, I'm now fully awake and have realized I am actually now atheist. And we start to do things together that we'd never done. Like I met former ex-witnesses as well. I met ex-witnesses. I met other apostates. I realized I was an apostate and I was quite okay with that. Just all of this started to unfold, and we started going to music concerts together and comedy gigs and just doing new things. We celebrated our birthday for the first time. We celebrated our first Christmas. We did our first Easter egg hunt. We did all of these firsts. We voted for the first time. Just exploring life now with totally new eyes, and navigating family relationships. They didn't know that we were going through this. They knew that we were no longer attending meetings, but they didn't actually know what had happened. Deconversion, as you know, was one hell of a process.
That's amazing. I feel like I'm just sitting here in, a bit enraptured, because it's an amazing story, and it's such a cool story how he was so patient and supportive and able to help you. And I feel for him too, because that's where I am at. My wife is still very much a believer,
Right.
very, very, very conservative evangelical, and I know other people that are in the same boat, and it's a hard journey to go through without support. It's a hard journey to go through knowing that people will be judging you, intensely judging you. Some of the descriptions include things like, it's as if you are suddenly on heroin and you're trying to tell everyone that heroin is such a good thing and it's nothing but destructive. Like, why would, it's those kind of messages that could cut right to the heart. And you're just trying so hard to be honest with the facts. And it's amazing too how, like you mentioned earlier in the interview, the story where someone else that had been like an elder and his wife had left. It's amazing that the lack of the questioning of the people that have left, like from an insider's perspective, if you're still in it, how much it must have cost them. In other words, that they knew that they were, to borrow a Christian phrase, they were counting the cost. The Bible talks about, if no man's going to build a tower unless he first figures out if he can build it. You're not going to go to war unless you can figure out if you're going to actually have a good chance of winning. Yeah. That there's a huge cost to leaving not just your community, but your very God, the gospel, the glory of your hope. You're walking away from something that is so, so important. Unless you're literally insane or something, but if you're of sound mind, you must have had some kind of weighing process where you said, this is, staying is worth so much, leaving is worth this. And to someone who has left, we know that it's like, if you had the actual scale in front of you, leaving it is just like kerplunk, like, of course I'm going to leave. There's no choice but to leave. And for the people that are in it to just, I didn't have anyone that I can think of that was like really close to me that had deconverted. I had some friends at a distance, but I think if I had friends who had left, I could have been tempted to also just like, well, I guess, sad for them. So that they made such a foolish choice. I think I could have been just as callous. I hope I wouldn't have been. I don't know, but I think I could have been just as callous, because when you know that you know that you know that you know that you have the truth, everybody else is like, I don't really care why you left. Like, all I want to do is fill my mind up with the truth. I mean, It doesn't matter. There's nothing you can tell me that can take me away from my precious Jesus. He is my Lord and Savior, and I know that He's real. I've tasted and I've seen the goodness of God. You can't tell me it's not real. Why do I care what your answers are? And I wonder too sometimes. This is a side conjecture, but I wonder too sometimes if people are threatened, in the sense like that they're like, anything that they could have told you and said, Sherrie, we need to talk because you need to know more about the gospel, or you need more about the Bible. Like, they can't do that if you've already been one of the preachers of it. You've been able to literally go out there and tell everybody. What are they going to tell you? Like, everything else that they could tell you, you've already told yourself. You preached it 100 times. What can they say? And it's interesting though, because you do feel, as the person that's left, like I know that you couldn't pull me back because I've seen too much. I couldn't come back if I wanted to. I know this is mythology, but don't you even care? Like, do you not care about my soul anymore? Like what?
There's levels of it. I totally agree with everything that you've just said. There's also you knew what I was. You knew the type of witness I was. Aren't you curious? Don't you want to know? Do you not think I haven't weighed it all up? This is not a decision that you just decide on overnight, right? It's quite a process. Do you not think they just don't want to know. I had a conversation with my sister, and this is 2019. She actually tells me that sorry, I've jumped ahead a little bit, but during this conversation, this is how I find out Sasha and I have actually been disfellowshipped now. We haven't been told officially that we've been disfellowshipped, but it appears that in our activism and a few of the videos that we've done, the elders have become aware of that, and they've seen that as now an act of apostasy and an act of willful disassociation, and so they've disfellowshipped us.
Like when you shared your deconversion online?
Oh, yes, we had by that time. And in fact, we had done quite a few things. We had done a few interviews together. I had done several interviews on my own. We even had, in June 2019, we'd organised the largest gathering of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. We had 134 ex-Jehovah's Witnesses at an event in Sydney. We did it as a bit of a healing kind of, let's be together and just recognise each other. And we had activists from across the world come. We had a film crew from LA come. We actually managed to get Federal Justice Angus Stewart, who had been the main senior counsel in the Australian Royal Commission, who had done all of the questioning. We had him come to our event. It was just amazing. And that had been on a live stream and is on YouTube. We thought that's surely got to get us disfellowshipped. No, still not disfellowshipped from that. What actually did it was in November, Lloyd Evans had asked me to do a live stream with him on the Elders book, to critique the Elders book.
Which is what is that book?
The Elders book is the guidebook that the elders use on how to manage the congregation, basically, how people are appointed as pioneers and ministerial servants, what the list of sins that you could commit that would see you disfellowshipped, and reinstatement process. It's the handbook to all of that.
So church polity.
Yes, but no one's allowed to see it, Tim. The only people allowed to see the Elders book are elders. And when you finish being an elder, you have to hand the book back. You're not allowed to. No one else is to see this. Of course, when you become an apostate, you learn more about the organisation than you ever did in. And all of a sudden, you have access to this information. So
someone obviously leaked it at some point.
Oh, yes. There's been a few leaks. I'm asked to give a woman's perspective to the Elders book. This book that we've never seen. So I do this live stream. 2 days later, we get disfellowshipped. Apparently, that was the line too far. A woman, daring to give an opinion on the Elders book, and I made a bit of a joke about it, because women, if you are in a position where you have to fulfill a role that only men can do. So let's say, for example, a group of women have gotten together in the morning to go out witnessing, to go door to door, and there's not a man to lead the group, right? There's no man available. So a woman can lead the group, but she must wear a head covering out of respect that it should have been a man, but there isn't a man available. So I decided that it would be extremely appropriate in critiquing the Elders Handbook to have an array of head coverings. And I had all sorts of head coverings. I had a Audrey Hepburn beautiful big hat with a scarf. I had a baseball cap. I had a bike helmet. I had a fascinator for, horse racing. And I had a Santa Claus hat.
I love it.
Yes, well, I had to bring some levity to it because it was an extremely triggering conversation to read how the elders, assess the... But anyway, so my sister calls about 6 weeks later after we've been disfellowshipped. It's around the time of the terrible bushfires that we were having here in Australia, and some of the bushfires were not too far away from us, so within about 10 kilometres, and it was just thick with smoke. It was a terrible time. She called to find out how we were going. She's in Tasmania. And I said, we're okay, we're all right. we're managing. She said, I was just worried because of the news of the last few weeks. So I just wanted to make sure you're okay. I'm like, what news of the last few weeks? She said, we had one of your elders call us to tell us that you and Sasha were being announced as no longer Jehovah's Witnesses. That's the announcement they make when you've been disfellowshipped. I didn't even know. Oh, okay. Well, I'm really glad you called because we wouldn't have known. She said, didn't they tell you? I said, no, Donna, I've not spoken to an elder in about 3 years. No one has come to me at all. So I said, so that's interesting that we've been announced. And she said, apparently you've done a few things on YouTube. Oh, okay. I said, well, Donna, I'm not going to tell you anything, but because my purpose is not to upset you. But if you ever have any questions, I will answer you as honestly and gently as I can. And her response was immediate. Oh no, but I'll never ask. That's the fear. It's the fear of if I know, and I do wonder what my sister really thinks, because she wasn't the same witness that I was. I was so gung-ho and, serious, and I had such high expectations for myself. And she was affected by that because everyone in the congregation expected that she would follow my footsteps. She would do the same thing that I did. And Donna's a different person, and she wasn't going to do that. And she got kind of soft judged because of that. So I can't help but wonder that when you've got two girls where one has been a regular pioneer and the other hasn't, and yet the regular pioneer leaves, I find it hard to understand why she's not curious or doesn't want to find out about that process at all.
Would she be allowed to watch like a YouTube video that you've made, or would that be considered? No? It's
apostate. She would see it as apostate. So yeah, I don't think
she'll never see you critique in all your hats.
No, she won't see all my hats. No, well, she won't see the array.
I gotta say, everything you've been saying here for the last 10 or 20 minutes, it's dripping with indoctrination, and it's dripping. Maybe a better word is really brainwashing.
Yeah,
the idea that you control, manipulation, the shunning, the sheltering, the blinders. It's absolutely amazing what this is, and it sounds near total. It's not quite total where they're necessarily seeing everything you do, but it's. I mean, this is getting dangerously close to North Korea here. I mean, we're talking about a group that literally controls what you watch, what you read, who you talk to. I'm assuming, was your sister encouraged to shun you then?
Oh yes.
Okay.
So as far as the family is concerned, a number of things have happened. So the broader community has yet cut us off. But then other things start to happen, and, aunts and cousins, and you just don't hear from them anymore. But then the closer relationships, my father actually wrote me a card to tell me that he had to cut me off. He felt that having any relationship with me was an act of disloyalty to God.
And that's still...
Yes, that's still... So I've not spoken to him. It'll be coming up 2 years. 3, 2.
I'm so
3.
Sorry,
I was right the first time. And awesome. I mean, the circumstances that happened was all a bit gnarly as well. I was his sole carer. I had power of attorney and enduring guardianship because he's not a well man. And we were providing financially for him as well. But no, he just couldn't do it. As he began to realise, he thought I was just discouraged. He thought I was stumbled by the Australian Royal Commission and by what had happened. And I had talked to him about the child abuse and said, I just can't accept that. And he's like, oh, well, it's not a perfect organisation, does all of the apologetics. And I said, Dad, I cannot understand how Satan's organisation has to tell God's organisation how to protect children. I don't understand that. And that's really pure and simple what we're getting down to here. So, so he thought I was just discouraged. But I was, because I didn't want to feel like I was being dishonest to him and not letting him know how far it actually went. So gently, I tried to learn from my husband and how he'd handled me. I just slowly mentioned a few things in conversation. I remember he'd made a comment about Satan. You know, you've got to be careful about Satan, Sherrie. And so I'd said, I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure that Satan exists. And that actually got this huge reaction from him, where it tantamount to saying that you didn't believe God existed.
Yeah.
But it got to the stage where he then realized our lack of non-belief. It wasn't just we're upset, we don't believe. And that's when it was, no, I can't have anything to do with you anymore. For Sasha, it's been even, in my view, I think it's worse for him. He's an only child. So he's always had a very close relationship with his mother and father. His father has been an elder for decades, must be 35, 40 years now, I'd say. His mother never became a witness. His father became a witness after they were married. So obviously they're still together. Sasha, in his early years, still had things like Christmas because of his mum's non-belief. She would take him to the family Christmases. But then at the age, just before he turned 9, Sasha's father was, that's it, no more. And then from then on, Sasha had the same raising virtually that I did. Now, even though I'm convinced that Sasha's father was told that we were being announced, I mean, why would my sister be called and not his elder father in Perth? So I'm convinced he was told. He kept talking with us until about 4 or 5 months later, when it became public knowledge in his congregation. He had someone come up to him in the congregation and say, look at what your daughter-in-law and your son have been doing on YouTube. That was when he then had to call Sasha and say he would no longer be talking with him, and that he would never come to our house again. He would never see us again. Sasha asked him, does that mean I'm not welcome in your home? And he said, yes, you are not welcome here, to which you can imagine Sasha's mother's response to that. It has torn them apart. Sasha's father is just immovable. He will not talk to Sasha at all, ignores phone calls. The shunning is extreme from him, and what it is doing to Sasha's mother is just horrific. It's just terrible to see this poor woman who, through no fault of her own, now has a situation where the two people she loves most in her life have nothing to do with each other. All because of a religion, or because of dictates of a religion. And the comments you made earlier about North Korea, and you're so right. You realize as you deconvert that what we're talking about here is actually a cult. I have been reading about cults. Steve Hassan's work has been particularly informative to me. He wrote a book called Combating Cult Mind Control. And in that book, he outlines the BITE model to help identify cults, because cults can be religious, they could be political, they could be financial, commercial, any breed, really. But the BITE model stands for behavior, information, thought, emotion, control. And when you analyze those, Jehovah's Witnesses tick the box on most of them. So, yeah, it is a highly controlling organization. I think people think that it's not a cult because it's so big. There are 8.5 million people, but unless they do the deep dive like this interview is giving us the opportunity to do, they don't realize that this is actually a high control organization.
And I just piggyback on that to say it's interesting that for Protestant evangelicals, which is my background, we would have said in a heartbeat Jehovah's Witnesses are cults. Absolutely, every fiber of our being would say they're cults. There's no doubt about it. The irony, again, the irony of that, it's this sense of, well, Jehovah's Witnesses are, you know, certainly a cult, but they're small compared to the, you know, the real Christians. It's like size does not make your cult any less of a cult. It just means you've got a bigger cult, you've got a bigger brainwashing, and you've got a harder job now of getting out, because the chances of you meeting people who don't believe just like you it's even smaller. And it's unbelievable that, I mean, it's the way that they control you. And some of the stuff you're saying is a little bit more, it sounds a little bit more intense than a lot of people that I've talked to, but they're all flavors of the same thing. Like,
totally.
My dad had passed before I died, or before I deconverted. But it was interesting. It was actually, I'll just tell this anecdotally. He had died in the spring of 2019, and I had gone to, of course, to the funeral, and then came back home. That's up in Philadelphia, up north, not far from New York State, and I'm down here in Atlanta, Georgia, which is closer to Florida.
Right.
And so I'd gone up for the funeral and came back down. And of course, as you do with anybody would at a funeral, you do your grieving, you do your goodbyes. And I remember thinking later that very year, September of 2019 was when I deconverted. And I was sitting in front of this very computer, and I'd been studying the origins of Judaism and Christianity in depth for 18 months. I mean, and all that time I would have never said, this is leading to atheism. Never would have said it. But I sat down here listening to somebody, as you do, and it was like everything clicked. And I mean, it was like someone, I don't know if you have fire hydrants the same way we do here in the States, but you know, the metal pipes where the firemen can quickly hook up their hoses. Yeah. It felt like someone had strapped me into a chair, like I couldn't move, and it just opened the valve and just flooded my face. Within an hour, I was fully deconverted. It was like I was like talking to myself, as if I was saying, you know what? I don't think this is real. And I was like, wait, no, that can't be. What a stupid thought. Wait, could it? Could this be fake? And all of a sudden, all the stuff that I've been thinking about for 18 months, I mean, in depth, detailed studies of the Yahweh character, the Jehovah character, the origins of the Bible, the New Testament especially, it just came together, and I was like, shoot, this isn't real, is it? And I was like, I was again talking to myself, like, admit it, say the words, say it. This is not real. And just saying those words to yourself, even in your head, it's so hard. But it's like you feel like you're like as if you had some kind of accident where you can't use your tongue for a while, and you're just trying so hard, or your legs, and you're trying so hard to take that first step, and you're like, say it to yourself. It's so weird to even think. It's not even just bad, like as in an apostate. It's just weird. It's bizarre to say it. This has never been real. You've been praying and praying and praying for decades, and you've been talking to the walls. It's a weird thing. And the afterlife, you know, what about the afterlife?
Yeah.
What about all of it? And within an hour I was gone. But to get back to the funeral example, it was like everybody would go to a funeral and expect you, like if you were an outsider, and you're not, maybe it's not your dad that passed, but someone else's dad passed, you'd expect as a friend of the family to go and completely respect their grieving. You know, please grieve. I'm here for you. What can I do to help you? We love you. We support you. Because they just lost their dad. But how much bigger of a deal is it to lose your heavenly father? Like, your dad is only here for whatever, 40, 50 years of your life. Your heavenly father, we're talking about forever and ever and ever. Your earthly father can't do but so much for you. Your heavenly father's given you the glories of everything. And you just lost him. And instead of them coming to you saying, well, it looks like you're having a funeral, let me be respectful of your funeral of the biggest dad ever. It's like, screw you. You're an enemy. You're an apostate. You're a traitor. You are a traitor. And that's what they do. And it's so ugly. It's so ugly.
I totally agree. You've described the process really, really well. They don't see the trauma that you've actually gone through in that deconversion process. And that takes me back to that first weekend when I learned about Sasha's non-belief. I saw the trauma, and I couldn't be cold and callous about that, because I could see he was so distressed. I saw from his point of view the loss of faith and belief, how much of an impact it had had. And then when I went through it myself, yeah, I was angry too. I was so angry at having been lied to, having been manipulated, both by the organization, but also by myself, because I realized that those prayers that I told you about when I was 7 and when I was 15, I had created that sense of presence in my own mind. I had come up with that myself. I'd convinced myself of it. There was no substance to any of it. And I realized that this whole notion of religion and belief in a higher power was something that I had conjectured all by myself. I had not a shred of evidence to support any of it. And that just, you then start to, after you've done the doctrine bit, for me, the process was then learning who I was, because my identity had been so tied up in this religion that who am I now? What do I actually think or believe? And that was scary at first. It was really quite terrifying.
Yeah.
I felt like I had nothing tethering me down. And that meant the world became a even more frightening place. I had to seek therapy and see a psychologist to try to work through all of the emotions and trauma that I was going through, because it was starting to affect work and other aspects of life. Now, probably in the last 12 to 18 months, it's been more about identifying patterns of behavior that were influenced by the religion and by the doctrine. The whole sense of this, like I mentioned earlier, about undeserved kindness and not being worthy, reframing that, learning to reprogram that, reprogramming the notion of imperfection, that it's not imperfection, it's just being a freaking human, for goodness sake. We're just humans. Learning to recontextualize that, learning who I am as a woman, and being able to explore my own potential, not have a religion dictate what my parameters are and what my boundaries are, but redefining those for myself. And that's what's led me to things like recovering from religion, and now being on the board, and now wanting to bring recovering from religion to Australia and making them an international organization. I never thought that was something that I could do. It wasn't on my plan. I didn't have that as a list or a goal. It's just sort of evolved. And to be involved in activism at this level, where I'm very passionate about raising awareness around religious trauma, because what you and I are just talking about now is religious trauma, all the aspects of it, and how deep it goes. And it is ambivalent about whatever the teaching was. It doesn't matter if you came from a Protestant Christianity background, Jehovah's Witness, Mormon, Scientology, Nexium, any of these, and all of the others. It's the same pattern of control that we're talking about, and it's the same religious trauma that you are going through, and you need to be aware of it, and people need support through this. There needs to be more awareness for mental health professionals on how people that are dealing with this trauma, complex trauma, need to be treated and supported.
Yeah.
Governments should be aware of this. Policymakers should be aware of this. The law should be aware of this. Media, journalism. Let's talk about these issues and help support the people that are dealing with it. That's what I'm trying to do.
And it really brings out to the notion that what we're talking about when you do this to children is this is a version of psychological child abuse. You're setting them up to believe there's nothing good in them. Most religions, at least most versions of Christianity I've been exposed to, including my own, You're worthless without Christ. All our righteousness is like a filthy rag. You've fallen short of God's glory, and the wages of sin is death. You deserve death because you inherited the sin nature from Adam, and you've added to it your own volitional sin. You've sins of omission where you failed to do what would honor God. You have so much bad about you, and then of course you add on to it the fear stuff, especially for, like we talked about, the fear of hell. You deserve
Yes.
hell, and then you add in the stories like you said, like God he's a consuming fire, according to Hebrews. It's a scary and dangerous thing to fall into the hands of the living God. He will, like he says, you will reap what you sow. You cannot fight God and not have him do whatever he needs to do to either bring you back to himself and make you bow your knee, or else to punish you. And it's fascinating to me. It's like a case study where when you tell Christians something like, do you realize this is psychological child abuse? Their answer is like, it's like a sarcasm, like, oh sure, God loves me. Hell, that's so abusive. I'm like, the the whole construct is, why do you even need his love? Because you're so broken. And
Yes.
what in the world, what kind of God, well, like, who is this God? Oh, he's a God who commands genocide, slavery, land
Yeah.
theft, child brides, stoning, all this stuff, genital mutilation with circumcision. Like, what kind of
Yes.
psycho God? Like, why do I need that psycho God's love? And why do I need blood? Why can't he just say, I forgive you? What's blood magic about?
Right.
And
And on that, this was part of what led me to atheism. Was I started to think about Armageddon, the flood. You're telling me that the best solution divinity can come up with is mass extermination.
yes.
That's the only solution? You can't find a better, more divine way than just genocide? Come on. That's Iron Age man thinking. That's human thinking. That's not. I expect better. I expect better from someone claiming to be divine.
And you realize, once you realize that it is made up, it is just a man-made story, you realize, like, this whole thing is not actually, like, no one's forcing us. I know there's places in the world where they're kind of forcing people, like North Korea, but by and large, most of the planet, they're not forcing us to stay in this. We're just volitional. It's like we are putting the handcuffs on ourselves. We are saying, I don't know, we're really not, because we're passing it on to our children. So we're kind of putting handcuffs on our children, and then they just get used to it. But we're as a species, we're handcuffing ourselves for something that is literally a nothing. It's a null. It's a zero. There is no God, and this is a man-made book. We're just making up stories and are shackling our entire lives and our species history to something made up. And I wanted to add, if I could, final note about my deconversion. All this stuff that we're talking about, you would think that it would be more than enough to deconvert somebody. And when you talk about the genocide, land theft, slavery, all that bad stuff, and you think the weird stuff like talking snakes and donkeys, the sun standing still, bread falling from heaven, the Reed Sea parting, you would think that this would be enough. But for me, it wasn't. And I always like to try to share at least a minute's worth of what it took for me. And I know that some people, they can look at even like the philosophy, like they'll say, just go to a hospital and see the kids dying of cancer.
Right.
Isn't that enough to tell you there's not a God? But for me, for some reason, I was like, if God is in charge and he's the judge of the earth will do right. Therefore, I'm not going to fight God. He can do what he wants. He's the judge. What it took for me particularly, and I think certain personalities need this, not everybody, but certain personalities, and myself included, I needed to actually study, where did this come from? And what I mean is, when you look at, for example, the Yahweh character, the Jehovah character, he was originally, in the evolution of the story, the son of a higher god named Elyon, and he was just one of many children. And Elyon had a wife named Asherah. Eventually they merged, and Yahweh was the same, and Yahweh had a wife named Asherah. That's why you can find a lot more proof archaeologically of Asherah than even Yahweh in Israel, because there was this female god. Eventually they turned it and they changed the story, and no, it's not Yahweh and Asherah, it's just Yahweh. And it all kind of keeps merging and shifting. But eventually, when you get to the New Testament, this is where it really tipped over for me. I became exposed to just a couple snippets of something, of information that at least tipped me off to there's more here. So keep figuring out what else, like, this much, 10 things, but you suspect that there's actually like 1,000. And there was things such as learning that Luke and Acts is based heavily on Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, that it's a rewrite. You can see the
Wow.
stories written in it. You can even see quotes, lots of quotes from Homer, from Euripides, from the Bacchae, from Virgil, right there in the Gospels. Learning from Bill Darlison, his book, the Zodiac in the Zodiac and the Gospel, that the Gospel of Mark is structured according to the constellations of the zodiac in the right order. I'm like, are you kidding me? But then to find out our Protestant canon does not include the book of Enoch. I'm assuming yours did not either.
No, no.
And to find out that the Ethiopian church had never lost the book of Enoch, millions of them for generations and generations, 2,000 years, they've never, dedicated Christians that love Jesus, they've never not had the book of Enoch. And then I find out, I'm thinking, okay, well, that's weird. But then I actually dive into what does the book of Enoch say? And I find that our Protestant canon actually quotes Enoch over 100 times. You just don't know it. You just think, oh, it says Jesus says this. Oh no, he's quoting Enoch. Paul says this. Oh no, he's quoting Enoch. You're like, what? Why didn't someone tell me that Enoch's quoted 100 times in this book? Then you find out it's much bigger. Jubilees, Maccabees, quoting it, not just like allusions, quoting it. Sirach or Ecclesiasticus, the wisdom books, the life of Adam and Eve, all these books over and over. And I start going into stuff like Greek philosophy, finding out they're quoting Plato and Aristotle and Socrates directly in the Gospels. You think it's the Sermon on the Mount. He's quoting Plato over and over. And, of course, lots of stuff with the Midrash, quoting the all these Jewish commentaries. And then one of the biggest crux that kind of really just hit me, it hit home so hard for some reason, Pythagoras. Are you familiar with Pythagoras in the New Testament?
No.
Pythagoras was a cult leader. Lo and behold, go figure that. A very strange cult leader. You had to like stuff like where you had to have a vow of silence for a couple of years before you could even talk to the man. It was like very, very careful who they led in that group. But he believed numbers were everywhere, and that like reality was just numbers. And so they would study the magic basically of the universe through numbers. And one of their main magic numbers, which I'll explain in a future presentation, but it was the number 153. And there's a story told where Pythagoras was walking along with fishermen. They're in the boats, and he says, hey, I want to make a wager with you. If I tell you exactly how many fish you're about to catch in your net, and I'm correct when you pull them in and count them, will you please put them back? And they make the wager, and it doesn't tell you in that story what the number was. It just says that he guessed correctly and they had to put it back. Well, you get to John 21. Jesus says, hey, you guys have been fishing. Did you catch anything? No, we didn't catch anything. Okay, we'll do it again. Master, we've been fishing all night. We'll do it one more time. They pull this net in. They pull it to the beach, and they happen to count them. Why would they count them? I don't know. Just say it's a lot of fish. They count the fish, and John 21 says it's exactly 153 fish. Like, oh my goodness, they're copying Pythagoras here. Then you look at all the other Pythagorean numbers, Luke 2 with Anna and her ages in the temple. You look at Revelation, 144,000, the dimensions of New Jerusalem. This is Pythagoras on steroids. And then you find out the Essenes were extreme Pythagoreans. And the Essenes, wearing their white robes and all this stuff, believing that they were the elect and all this, that the Armageddon for them was about to happen because they believed in the book of Enoch. They believed the angels were about to come down and help them to restore the kingdom. They were, the origins of this stuff are Pythagorean, Essene, proto-Christians. And there's a lot more to it. That's oversimplifying it, I know. But there's a lot of stuff beyond that. But just thinking, what in the world? You guys didn't tell me this. I went to Bible college. I don't if you want to still say you're a Christian, fine, but tell me where this thing came from.
Yeah.
And then make your decision. I've described it like if you had a table and you said, here's 100% of what you deserve to know to make an informed decision about your faith. It's like you told me, 3, 4, 5%. where's the other 95%? Tell me where this thing came from. And to me, that's just, it's an issue of fairness. It's not fair to tell people, I want you to put your whole life on this with this little teeny slice of information. And
what I that's fascinating. I didn't know a lot of what you've just mentioned, but what I can't work out is those who, the religious leaders, do some of them know? Have they done this kind of research? Are some of them aware that it's not actually true, or are they just as deluded as the rest of us and just as ignorant? I can't quite work that out.
Yeah. I would guess it's a split. I would guess that there's got to be some people that know. And I think it comes down to an addiction issue. Like, if you believe that you're, like, if you come up to your kid and say, hey, sweetie, you did a great job doing your drawing, it makes you feel good as a kid. Oh, my mama said this looks good. I must be a good artist. It feels so happy, so nice to be praised. Well, if your sky daddy's praising you, oh, I prayed again. God, are you happy? Yes, I am. Good job. Well done, my good and faithful servant. It's an addiction, and you can't cut that off. It feels so weird to suddenly be like, where does my approval come from? Where does my identity come from? There's nothing left. That's just one of my guesses, but I think that's part of it, at least for some of us.
I would say so. I think with the Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm becoming more cynical. I do think that some of their decisions are more based on legal risk. So, for example, the blood transfusion doctrine. So that came in the 1940s about not having blood transfusions. And then I think it was 2000, 2001, because medical technology had increased and improved, where whole blood isn't often transfused anymore. It's fractions that are transfused. So they then said, okay, whole blood you still can't have, but fractions, some of the fractions are up to your conscience. So the main 4 blood components, plasma, platelets, white blood cells, red blood cells, you can't have whole transfusions of any of those. But if there are derivatives of derivatives, then that's a conscience matter and you can go for it. Okay. Now, the amount of lives that have been lost because of this policy, they're backed into a corner now, because even though medical technology has continued to improve, even with COVID, in convalescent plasma therapy is one of the treatments for COVID. It is taking the antibodies of those that have survived COVID and then infusing that into someone who is really struggling with COVID. But the mechanism is via plasma, because plasma holds the antibodies. Plasma is acellular. It doesn't have anything else. It's a major component, but there's no actual cellular blood component. It's just the fluid that the antibodies travel in. Jehovah's Witnesses have said you cannot have convalescent plasma therapy because it is blood that is being used. So they still hold to these ideas and notions of blood being so sacred that you can't actually have it transfused. But they've blocked themselves into a corner now, because if they are to change any of that policy, it opens themselves up to so much legal ramifications. Because what are you saying about the thousands of people who have died upholding this ridiculous teaching?
Do you ever just want to scream, like,
oh yeah,
like, what right do you have to even remotely make any comments about my medical choices? And even, like, it's not just like the anger, it's almost like it's silly. Like, so you disfellowshipped me, if I can say the word. You disfellowshipped me from your Mickey Mouse Club. It's not real. It's make believe. Why do I care if you disfellowship me from your Mickey Mouse Club? It's not real. It's mythology, and it's angering, but it's ridiculous. And but what's scary is that if you learn it from the earliest days when you're a little kid, it is as real can be. It is not a Mickey Mouse Club. It is absolutely. It is your everything. It's your worldview.
It's your life. It's everything. Yes, there are definitely times where I want to scream. Let me share one of them with you.
Sure, please.
You know that Elder's Handbook that I was talking about? I've printed it. I have it here. Now, this chapter is on determining whether a judicial committee should be formed. Okay, so here's the list of
like
things.
If someone's done something wrong?
Yeah, if you've done something wrong, we're going to have to form a judicial committee to judge you. Of course, right at the top of the list, sexual immorality. Porneia. Of course, yes. I won't get into that description. Interesting to note, masturbation of oneself is not porneia, let it be known. Here's where I get really cranky. One who was raped would not be guilty of porneia. Well, that's nice to know. If you're raped, you're not actually guilty of porneia. Okay. Discernment.
Sex in.
Right. Discernment is needed in considering claims of rape, taking into consideration such factors as the mental disposition of the person, the circumstances that led up to the incident, and any delay in reporting. And this was printed in April 2021. This is their current view. So if elders in the congregation have a woman come up to them saying she was raped, they have to consider her mental disposition, the circumstances that led up to the incident, which sounds very much like what clothes were you wearing, and how long did it take her to report. And when you read that, you realize, you're trying to assess whether it was rape or not, or whether she was consensual and is therefore complicit, and perhaps she needs to be judged for porneia then. And that type of stuff makes me scream. That makes me so mad, because there are so many women who are being misused and abused by these kind of policies, even in our current day. And I say that because I've had women approach me who've been raped and have had this kind of stuff going on. And if it's rape by your husband, you are in such a world of pain, because that's not even recognized. The religion does not even recognize. They say there's actually no scriptural principle broken. Marital rape is fine. So yes, I get quite heated.
It sounds almost like we're living in the dark ages, or just it's hard to imagine that even exists in this day and age.
It still does. It still does.
That's crazy.
And I want people to know about that, because, as we mentioned earlier, Jehovah's Witnesses are often looked at as a benign religion that just annoys you on Saturday mornings by knocking on your door. That is not what we are talking about. We are talking about a highly controlling, manipulating organization that is callous about life, a callous about people's independence, their decision-making. People need to know it is extremely harmful. It's one of many harmful religions. I'm not saying that it's all on its own, but don't give it a pass. Yeah,
it's just yet another cult based on mythology that's full of lies and absolutely ruining people's lives, and keeping basic information from people that they really do deserve. It's heartbreaking and hurting so many people. Well, can I ask, I know we've gone for a while here. I just wanted to ask, in terms of wrapping up, if you were talking to someone who is just at the beginning of this, where there's not being of our interview, but of the process of just asking questions, they might not even say they're deconstructing or deconverting. They might just say, look, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to stay in love with my Lord Jesus, with I should say with Jehovah. Jehovah is my God, and I no matter what you say, I've seen the miracles. I know He's alive. I know He's in my heart. I know He's real. But I definitely have some questions, and I'd like to get some answers. Or if they're hopefully a little bit more open to saying, yeah, there's something wrong here, I need to figure out what this is. What do you tell people who are just at the very beginning? And especially, like, what would you tell someone if they were in one of those contexts where the ramifications for them even asking these questions is pretty severe?
Yeah. first thing is make sure you're safe. Make sure that you're safe. Questions are healthy. Don't feel bad for having questions. Explore them, but make sure you do so in a way that you're safe first. In order to do that, you need support. So reach out to support groups that can help you, that are not going to tell you what to think. They're not interested in converting or proving to you anything. They're just going to allow you a place where you can safely express how you feel without any judgment. Support is vital through this process, but don't stop at asking your questions. Keep asking them, because if this life is all we have, you owe it to yourself to find out how you want to live it without having an organization tell you how they think you should be living it. You need to grab this life and live it on your terms, and you have the right, you deserve to have that. But while you're in this questioning phase, I am going to plug Recovering from Religion, because that's exactly what we do, is that we offer support groups. We offer those safe places. You don't have to come to Recovering from Religion as someone that's already deconverted. No. You got those questions? Come. We will say, okay, you've got this thought. What's your question? Okay, here's some resources that you can consider that might help you find an answer to that question that you're happy with. It's about being there on the journey with them, meeting them wherever they're at on that journey, whether they're in the very early part or whether they're in the I don't believe this at all, but I'm dealing with ramifications, whatever part you're at. That's what Recovering from Religion is here for, is to just give you that peer support to help you process and get through the whole deconversion thing.
Yeah, and I can personally attest. I didn't mention this before, but when I first deconverted, I didn't have pretty much anyone to talk to that I was aware of, and I think within the first month, I became aware of Recovering from Religion, and I did call. I remember at least 2 conversations that were very long. And like you said, they weren't trying to push anything. They did not push atheism. They did not push even agnosticism. They just said, we're just here to talk. You tell us what you want to talk about, and we just want to be a listening ear and kind of bounce ideas off each other. I know the first conversation I had probably lasted an hour or 2, where the gentleman, I think it was in Ireland, but he, and you can call any time of the day or night.
Yes.
There's always someone. But if you need help, and if you're in a spot where, like you said, it's safe to make that call, they want to listen. They want to be a caring ear, and they really do care, and they'll do anything to give you that support. And I want to make sure too, people know, if you want to look beneath this video on YouTube, I'll have the link and the phone numbers there, so you can directly, if you want to even stop right now, just call them right now. They definitely want to help. And
absolutely,
yeah, they've been a great help to a lot of people.
They're such an amazing organization to work along with. They train all of their agents. So, and of course, when you have a clinical and organizational psychologist, Dr. Darryl Ray, as the founder and president, your training is fantastic, because you learn new skills on how to listen to people. This is not about you. It's not about giving yourself a platform to say what you think. This is about being supportive to the person coming to you who's in need. And so they give you a lot of training. And Dr. Ray, I don't know how he does it, but he's just so present, and he listens into the conversations and will commend the agent. Oh, you did this really well, and that was absolutely fine. I loved it when you said this. And it's just such a positive organization to be involved with. I really do feel that I get way more out of it than I think I put into it, because it really does help for me to make sense of my life and how I've gone from a very devoted, believing Christian to now an atheist. which I still, as we started this conversation, go, huh? Working with recovering from religion helps me make sense to that, and I get a lot of healing out of it for myself. So I can't say enough about the organization. I just absolutely love working along with them, and which is why I'm so keen to bring it all here to Australia, because there isn't the support mechanisms here. You just, it's not recognized, and obviously there's a big need for it.
Yeah. And it's amazing too for anyone that is in that process where you're just starting. You probably already know it's a very weird process. We've talked about our journeys. You've probably by this point heard the people's journeys on YouTube or whatever. It's I described it a lot like the Matrix, where he gets plugged in and he learns jujitsu in 10 seconds. It's like, whoa, what was that? And it is. But as hard as it is to go through this process, and as much as it's not just painful, but it's just weird. It's really weird to take these steps. One of the hardest parts is you feel like on the other side of this, like what am I going to be like? What's going to be left? And I've heard it over and over and over and over from people, and myself included. You will have more peace at the end of this, not some kind of fake worldly carnal peace. We're not here because we want to sin. We're not here because we want to, fight God. We're here because none of that was real. It was all lies. And when you realize that you have now escaped something that a whole bunch of your peers may never escape, it's terrifying to think about. But you're like, I hit the jackpot. I'm out. I can actually use my mind. I escaped the Matrix, and most of my friends will not ever do that. And it just, your mind feels like it clears, like it's almost, again, to quote scripture, like we've been doing a lot. It's like Paul says this, the scales fell from his eyes.
Yes.
The scales truly fall from your eyes, and it's like you're born again. You're like, oh my goodness, my life has just started for real. I'm finally me again.
Yes.
Or for me for the first time. And I had more peace in the first week than I did in 43 years as a Christian combined.
Wow. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think on the back of that too, one of the sensations I had early on was that my sense of morality was actually higher and much better and more real than it ever had been as a witness, where my morality had been defined by a book. But now I see people for people, and I love just talking to them and just getting to know, who they are and what makes them click, and all of the judgments, all of the prejudices just drop, and you just see people for people. That sense of I am more moral now, more open to listening and to learning. I do have not boundaries, criteria on what I will, like it needs to be factual. I very much am grounded now in science, and I want to understand, and I want to base my opinions and beliefs on as much fact as I can get. But yeah, that sense of, as you say, that inner peace and just the opening of possibilities, and excitement of what life can have ahead of you, that you have much more of a realer sense about what life is, even with the really hard stuff, even when you lose people who have died. I don't think I ever really grieved as a witness, because I believed that they were just asleep in death and they were going to be resurrected later, and it kind of hijacks the whole grieving process. Whereas now I feel it on a totally different level, and it feels like it's real grief, because this is the human experience.
Yeah, it's a great point. Very good point.
Yeah.
It's like you're keeping people from the grief and just from the human experience. Like, let us be human. Let us embrace our humanity. Whether you're talking about grieving or sexuality, or just the ability to look up at the night sky and look at the beauty of the galaxy above us, and say, This is beautiful, and to not
Wow.
attribute it to some god that likes to cut off
Yeah.
the little boys' penises. Like it's just beautiful. Period.
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
It's so
And
freeing.
that's okay. And that's all right to just go, it's beautiful, and that be the end of the sentence.
Yeah.
And then it's okay to say, I don't actually know. I don't have to have an answer to every single situation, or no, it's okay. And I can be happy with not knowing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We
Well,
could talk and talk and talk and talk, Tim.
Well, I know I've asked you a lot of questions. Do you have any final? Did I miss anything you wanted to share before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think I've
We covered the basics.
talked sufficiently.
Well, I just want to say then thank you so much. We've been speaking with Sherrie D'Souza over in Sydney, Australia. Thank you so much for your time, your story, your willingness to talk through some very tough stuff, your bravery through it when you went through it, and certainly for your work with recovering from religion. And I certainly just want to say again, thank you to your husband for his amazing story. I didn't get to hear it from him, but I heard it through you. And wow, what a great guy! And just thank you for the great example you are. And I look forward to hopefully maybe at some point diving into some more of these topics. I got a great education tonight. I didn't know much about Jehovah's Witnesses, so you really helped a lot. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I love talking about all of this. So thank you very much for allowing me a platform. And I learned a lot too from a lot of what you had to say and a lot of what your research uncovered. So yeah, I've really enjoyed our chat. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and if I ever get that project done, I'll certainly let you know and share it with you. But thank you again. Let's do it again sometime.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.